All worlds are divided between evil and good, which oppose each other in an eternal struggle, and it is good when a hero is born who has enough strength to defeat the Demon King. He brings peace, goodness, and joy into his reality, uniting everyone around him with his light. Only this hero was not a simple knight without fear and reproach, but a traveler between worlds, and it seemed to him that since he was able to win the war with the demons, now the doors home were open to him by default. Perhaps he was not so far from the truth because even the deity spoke to him and was pleased with his actions and life choices. And someone else would even be happy about this. After all, God himself is talking to you. But the main character no longer believed in the good intentions of the deity because it had already promised to send him home more than once and did not keep its word. However, this time the goddess was absolutely sure of what she was saying, though she was not going to make concessions to the guy who had been a hero for 20 years and wanted to keep his memories after returning to his world. In addition, while the main character served the goddess, time stood still in his place, so by and large he did not miss or lose anything. Sadly, this round was the goddess's, and the guy was meekly accepting his defeat, so he asked to be sent back already and not waste time, since everything had been decided in advance. The goddess was pleased, and she also had a gift for her faithful servant for all the years they had dedicated to saving different worlds. She was going to give him a small piece of her power. That is, the main character will be able to transform the world around him, and all his actions will have an impact on the flow of dimensions around him. It sounded nice, but too unclear, and besides, the guy wouldn't remember this conversation, which meant that even a small hint wouldn't hurt him. But the goddess was categorical in her decisions. The main character had a long and interesting journey ahead of him, so she only smiled at her assistant. And the time for talking was over, and it was time for the young man to leave, or return to where he came from 20 years ago. A second later he disappeared, leaving the goddess alone to watch his adventures in the world where it all began and where his future destiny would be determined. Only he didn't know all this, and he simply fell through time and space, without insurance or a parachute, at his own risk, in the hope that everything would end well, and not as usual. No one could say for sure how long this went on, but it was good that there was no pain from the fall, and the rays of the bright morning sun hit the eyes, forcing the main character to open his eyes. The guy didn't remember what had happened to him before, but he felt amazingly good and rested, which wasn't surprising since it was 9 o'clock in the morning. And that was the last good news at that point in time, as the guy was late for work, and the manager was very angry, as all the sent and unread messages screamed. In the end, Ju-yun was late and received a scolding from his boss, who warned the protagonist one last time, threatening that if he came to work so late even one more time, he would be fired. Although the guy apologized, it didn't change anything except that he once again realized that his life was too hard, and he wanted to live differently, at least for a little while. But he didn't know how to achieve the desired result, so he sighed as he scanned the goods of another customer, thinking that he would soon be sleeping on the street, because even working 2 jobs, he wouldn't be able to pay off all his debts. Once again, Ju-yong secretly dreamed of awakening. Of course, he did not dare to voice it lest he be laughed at, but no one could forbid him from dreaming. And suddenly, a miracle happened that the guy did not expect. His unique ability, Master of All Skills, was activated. What he only dreamed of came true. He woke up. In this world, there was a category of people that everyone called awakened, or users, or players. Every year there were more and more of them, and the world under their influence also changed and became like a science fiction film or a game with augmented reality. Gradually, regions began to appear, and many players rushed there, driven not only by interest, but also by the desire for profit, since such places were rich in various resources on which one could make good money. After all, each player is endowed with certain abilities that they actively use, but even if it is something strange, there will be a use for it in the region, and the time spent will pay off. For this reason, Ju-yong, like many others, dreamed of awakening and solving all his problems at once. But this was a deceptive picture, because not everyone was lucky enough to receive high-ranking abilities and strike it rich. Even among the players there were complete losers. The luckiest player in the world is the one who has achieved S rank and reached level 70, and it would be strange if it were someone other than the Dragon Tongue skill owner who did it. It is difficult to say for sure how Muhammad Al achieved such a result, but one fine day he posted an interesting video on his personal account in one of the social networks. It went viral and became the most popular in the world in a few hours. No one could take their eyes off it, The sight was so mesmerizing. After all, no one expected to see a real meteor that Al would create and kill a dozen monsters. It is not surprising that looking at an amazing person with no less amazing magic, many dreamed of becoming like him. Everyone wanted to enter high-ranking dungeons and accomplish such feats alone. After all, Allah's meteors destroyed everything in their path. No one could resist him. After him, there remained only scorched earth and the coals of monsters. But his story did not end there, although the video was coming to an end. But something unexpected happened. The guy challenged the whole world, giving other players a week from uploading a video to demonstrate their skills if someone can outdo him. But he will give this person one valuable artifact. The talk was about the Ring of Elements, the only known SS rank artifact that every player with magical abilities wanted to touch at least for a minute. But after watching this video, the beautiful brunette concluded that Al, as always, decided to show off, and he was not going to give up his charm no matter how hard anyone tried. And there were many reservations in the video itself. For example, only magicians could take part in the competition, and the strongest in the world was Al, so no one had a single chance of winning. And the main character then thought that all this was not about him, that this beautiful and discussed story would pass him by, like many before it, because he is not the luckiest person in this world. He is nowhere near the great Al. Only he was a little mistaken, and he realized this when he first came to the first region he came across after waking up, and decided to practice a little, and as a result, he destroyed everything around, except for a small patch of land on which he stood. And he did all this not just like that, but in order to take part in the competition. So he did it on camera, and this video is seen by everyone in the world. And the video was seen by millions, and millions wrote comments, and everyone was sure that Muhammad Al lost to an unknown player. The protagonist, like many other players, knew that each awakened user is given a unique ability, and this very ability has the property of enhancing the effects of certain skills, which can be compared to a class in any computer game. There are a number of well-known unique abilities. For example, a player who has the ability Dragon Speech becomes a mage more powerful than the dragon itself. The user who has the ability to perform miracles necessarily becomes a healer, and they say that these people are able to resurrect even the dead. But there are also those who are given the ability to regenerate. That is, if they are seriously wounded in battle or lose one of their limbs, they will quickly grow it back and will be able to continue fighting. But there are also those who are destined to become warriors, because they have received the ability of a fatal blow. That is, they can defeat any villain who stands in their way. But then the main character had a logical question about what the Skill Master ability had in store for him. Since no one knew anything about this ability, the first thing the young man decided to do was to see what they were writing about it on the internet. After all, the first thing people look at when evaluating a unique ability is its rank, and the higher it is, the better the effects and the more additional abilities. But no matter how much he looked, he couldn't find anything about his ability, and at that moment, a skill window appeared in front of him. He expected to read something special and grandiose, but not that he became the happy owner of a unique ability that no one knows anything about. And all his other characteristics were equal to 1. And this despite the fact that high-ranking features should increase basic characteristics, but this was not about him. Moreover, he had only 2 additional features, and he, like all other users, planned to study any skill of interest from the book of skills that he would acquire in the future. Everything wouldn't have been so bad if he hadn't received the first task, which said that he had to copy someone's skill, but the guy understood perfectly well that in order to copy someone's skill, he needed to look at it somewhere, and he could only look in the area. But if he went there with his single characteristics, he most likely wouldn't get home. Nevertheless, a task is a task, and it had to be completed somehow. It was at this moment that Zhu Yang came across Al's video and couldn't resist watching it to the end. Moreover, his copying ability was activated automatically as soon as he saw a meteor shower. Meanwhile, at home, Al sat in a comfortable soft chair, drank red wine, and watched a video of the main character in the background. The man was absolutely calm and relaxed, but his assistant was not calm. She was interested in why it was important for someone to receive the Ring of the Elements. Al didn't answer her question. He understood that this young man he saw on the video had mastered his unique skill in less than a week. And then the question arose, what were the chances that someone else would be able to do something similar? But the girl couldn't believe that they saw a meteor shower in the video, thinking that it was some other similar skill, but not that one. It was a pretty logical assumption, but Al couldn't deny that the guy in the video could very well be S rank, even though there was no evidence of that, nor was there an area with destruction like the one in the video. And there was some truth in this too, but the man remained of his opinion. So he ordered his assistant to give the main character the ring of the elements and his map, and also to maintain a distance and watch the guy. Meanwhile, the main character was at work, where he arrived quite on time and was looking through the statistics of his video. So he didn't pay attention to the little girl who came up to the store counter and started asking him about fried jelly. But it was in vain that he began to ignore the child, because it is clear that the girl came to the store not alone, but with her parents. And this very parent decided to intervene in such an ugly situation. After all, no one can ignore his little princess when she wants to buy fried jelly, so the guy had to pull himself together and work hard. He was very lucky that he managed to resolve the situation without losses, because the formidable dad could have hit him if his girl had started crying. But this situation passed, and did not worry Ju Yong much because he was thinking about something completely different. He really wanted to get the ring of the elements, although he understood perfectly well that most likely Al would not give it to him. But if a miracle happened, the guy believed that it was entirely possible, and then he could earn enough money to never work again. Moreover, he consoled himself with the hope that he could become such a strong player, and the whole world would turn its eyes to him. Until this moment, the young man had not even dared to dream of something like this. But now it no longer seemed so distant and unrealizable. And at that moment, Al wrote a message to the main character that he was ready to give him the ring of poetry, since he was able to show such a brilliant result. This was not a deception, because after some time, Al's assistant contacted him and met with him in order to give him the ring of the elements. Well, besides the fact that she gave the guy the ring and then offered to walk him home, since the gentleman wanted to meet the guy in person. But the meeting had not yet taken place, and the main character was already lying at home, looking at the treasured ring, thinking that it was quite possible that it was some kind of fake, since they had given it to him without thinking. But I read the characteristics of this artifact and immediately realized that the ring was real. Since the item is real, he shouldn't lie on the bed and stare at his hand. He has a great opportunity to go to the region and have a good hunt. But his basic characteristics were practically zero, even with the ring of verses, so it was logical to buy some armor, but unfortunately, it cost a lot of money. At that moment, a brilliant idea came to him that since he had no money, and they wouldn't give him a loan, and monetization from the channel was not yet possible, then he could become a healer and receive a huge profit, which would be enough. And to realize his idea, he went to the Duranka Marsh region, namely to the large Seoul Park, because all the other good places had long been taken. But he had no clients, so he had to entertain himself with his phone. And so it was for quite a long time until an interesting couple appeared in the park, a strong warrior who was carrying a wounded, bleeding girl in his arms. The main character didn't think that he would have to do anything serious, but the knight who appeared before the guy had a completely different opinion. Ju Yan had to make every effort to save the girl. But the main character really didn't like this tone, because he believed that no one had the right to speak to strangers in such a commanding tone. I immediately remembered the behavior of his impudent customers, who didn't even consider him a human being. Besides, even if his skill was a copy of others' skills, if it was used correctly, it would achieve a good result. And now he needed to respond with something, but the words could not be found. And he was already so angry and ready to yell at the knight, but he interrupted him and offered 20 million for the service. It sounded like a spell and made Ju Yan docile and obedient. But as soon as the guy looked closely at the girl's bloody wounds, he shuddered and almost turned inside out. Noticing the main character's condition, the knight asked him to pull himself together and begin the healing process, since if he continued to delay, his girlfriend would die. And the main character would not hesitate, but he had only seen something like this in movies, so it was difficult for him to do anything now. But if he continued to stand there like a statue, nothing good would happen. And even if he was not confident in his abilities, he still had to try, and a second later he applied the treatment. The light of healing worked. The girl's wounds began to heal and she began to look much better. But their acquaintance did not end there, as the knight demanded several more treatment sessions, and the guy understood that if he did not have the ring of the elements, he would have a very hard time. Having come to his senses a little, Ju Yan allowed himself to think for the first time about where and under what circumstances the girl received such serious wounds. But he had no answers, nor was he sure whether he had done the right thing in curing her. But what he was absolutely sure of was that now he could quit. After all, he now had money and quite good money, and if that was the case, he needed to do something interesting. For example, you could buy some shares or get involved in crypto, but that was later, and now I needed to work in order to earn money for SP, and then I could do other things. True, at that moment he received a new task. He had to increase his passive income skill in order to receive an additional feature. Now he only had 70 SP points. In this scenario, if he receives at least 10 points from passive income per day, he will be able to complete the assigned task in 3 days. At that moment, the maid knocked on his door, since it was time to clean the rooms. And on the one hand, he could stay in the room and continue to rest, or he could go and practice the new skills that he had copied. But still, the young man decided to watch the video, eat excellent meat, so to speak, combine the pleasant and the useful. And then the idea occurred to him that he needed a video recording of the skills that he could view at any time. Besides, it's possible that if he increases his level, he will be able to copy skills without a time limit. So he created a playlist of useful and cool skills for the future, while eating too much of everything that he couldn't even move. It was a little stressful, but he was glad that he had managed to register as a healer in the association. The guy was lying on the bed and dreaming that one day he would be appreciated because he was such an irreplaceable player with a bunch of abilities, healing, and other buffs. A new day came, and the guy went to the park again to look for adventure, but a beautiful brunette came up to him and began to thank him for something. He didn't recognize her at all as the girl he had recently treated. It turned out that it was she who his brother had brought to him for a treatment session. The girl realized that if the young man had not been there, she would have died. She wanted to thank him, so she offered him the position of a temporary healer in their group. But Ju Yan was not yet mentally ready to enter the domain, which meant he would have to tactfully refuse. But the brunette was so beautiful, so sweet and charismatic, she even asked for his phone number to discuss everything over a cup of tea. And there was just a little bit left, and the guy would have agreed to everything and even more, but they heard a heartbreaking cry that was impossible to ignore. Someone was seriously injured again, and Ju Yan took over the treatment, leaving his friend with nothing. For this he received money and came to his senses, so he was able to refuse the brunette. He did not want to join the group and go to the region because his level is low. But this didn't bother the girl at all, because they had a mage and an S-rank tank in their group, so dragging the main character further wouldn't be a problem. And this scared Ju Yong. He had no arguments left for refusal. So he packed his things and started to run away, because he didn't want to join the group. Well, how could he not want to? He wanted to, but he was very afraid to do it, and he was also afraid to go to the region. Evening came, and the main character was once again spending the evening at the hotel, drinking wine and earning passive income points. So far, everything was going according to plan, and the system even offered him to improve his passive income from the first level to the second, which led to his SP earnings being increased 5-fold at once. Now, it was necessary to check the reward for completing the task. And it was pretty good. He got infusion. First level abilities, that is. He was given a randomly unique ability for each copied skill. The protagonist already knew that any user can use the same skills by reading skill books, but the power of these skills will be different for each player. In addition, the young man was also aware that each player's unique ability was different from others, which became the main weakness of the skill master, because without a unique ability, he had no ability, and he could only copy others, so they were initially weaker than those of the original owners. However, a thought arose in his head that it was quite possible that the copied skills would have unique abilities, but it would be extremely difficult to figure it out without practical testing. At this moment, he received a new task, as a result of which he had to hunt monsters using the copied skills, thus increasing the copy level of a large number of skills and opening up more information about skill mastery. Accordingly, for completing it, he would receive a certain reward. And this moment seemed strange to the guy, because it seemed like someone was constantly watching him, and along the way, inventing all sorts of tasks for him. However, he still had to complete the task, and in order for the monster hunt to be successful, he decided to copy the fireball skill. That is, learn to summon a fireball that could be thrown at a distance of 20 meters. In addition, a unique feature of combustion was discovered. That is, fire-type skills inflict damage over 67 seconds. A new day had arrived, and the main character, like many other players, stood at the entrance to the sheep ranch. And if the others felt fine, then Ju Yong was going crazy, although he tried not to show it outwardly. Besides, he bought all the necessary equipment, which meant that everything should go well, but there was still no confidence in this in his heart. However, it was time to say goodbye to the medical business and take up the path of hunting. And he stepped in, and with a spark, both literally and figuratively. But the problem was that he behaved strangely, and everyone began to consider him a psycho. But they wanted to recruit him. Nevertheless, the guy refused everyone, and not because they called him names, although it was unpleasant, but it was habitual. But it must be admitted that he really did smile when he killed monsters, but he didn't understand what was wrong with it. But every smile is different, and his really did look creepy, as if a maniac was out hunting, and not a person who was simply carrying out a task from the system. And after watching the video that captured that moment, the guy understood why he had that nickname, but to tell the truth, he was happy at that moment, because killing monsters turned out to be easier than he expected. And his efforts paid off in full, because the system unlocked an additional ability, efficiency, which reduced the cost of copied skills by 10%. This couldn't help but please. Besides, now the guy understood that the regions were not as scary as they initially seemed. Besides, he had good equipment, so he could use fireballs without stopping and causing damage to himself. Now the main character was re-watching the video again to find new useful skills for himself, and came across an interesting fight that happened a few days ago. And after that, he received a new task, and here he is standing in the middle of the forest, realizing that he needs to destroy the boss if he wants to get the promised reward. And while the other players were developing a plan of action, the main character launched a fireball at the monster. And Ju Yong didn't limit himself to just one ball. He kept throwing them at the boss, turning him into shish kebab. This went on for several minutes, and the monster fell to the ground dead, and the rest of the players froze in their places, not understanding how to react to what had happened. But it couldn't be that simple, and it wasn't, because the monster was only pretending to be dead to lull his opponent's vigilance, and was now ready to attack. Moreover, he became enraged, thus greatly reducing the skills and strength of his opponents, who were now unable to even move. Only one of them could move at the moment, so he took the main attack on himself, holding back the monster. The rest of the guys were already practically falling to the ground, but the boss's rage had no effect on the main character. Moreover, the system gave him an additional free task. He had to copy and apply the monster's skill. And he copied it. It was incredible. It's sad that after midnight, this cheat ability will disappear, but now you can use it to the fullest. And while the other player's stats dropped even lower, his own rose by a very decent amount of points. Now he could fight the boss on equal terms. So it's time to use fireballs again and finish off the monster. And this time the attack power was several times higher, which reduced the monster's chances of survival. The boss didn't move, neither did Ju Yan, and the system kept annoying him with messages that the boss was dead and that copying his main skill had been successful. Altogether, this created a new, exciting world for the main character, giving him life and opportunities that he had never dreamed of before. And enjoying the moment, the guy forgot that he was not alone in the clearing, and remembered when the other players started shouting that even though everything that happened seemed crazy, it was good that everything ended well. At that moment, the young man felt a strong sense of déjà vu, because this picture seemed vaguely familiar to him, but he didn't yet know why. But the guy quickly drove these thoughts away, as for the first time he experienced something very unusual and all-consuming, namely, the effect of absorbing the soul of a shadow bear. He had only heard about it before, but the sensations were much better than he expected. Besides, he knew very well that the boss's level was always at least 10 levels higher than the area itself, and if weak players were helped by a strong player, the corpse of the killed monster would disappear, leaving everyone with nothing. Therefore, everyone tries to kill the main boss themselves, without relying on the strength of others. And all for one simple reason: everyone wants to get the items that drop from the boss after his death. After all, some of these artifacts can be sold for hundreds of thousands, and the body of the boss himself is also worth a fortune, and if you know who to sell it to, you can strike it rich. The young man really liked these thoughts and prospects, and he was able to raise his level a little. It also warmed his heart that no one called him a psychopath today, but even thanked him and praised him for the work he had done. The group leader also admitted that without the help of the main character, and given that the boss was furious, he would hardly have survived. But Ju Yan dealt him heavy damage and everything ended well. At this point, the flow of praise dried up, and the leader of the group began to examine the item that had fallen from the monster. It was a piece of armor, but activating it was not at all easy. Therefore, he was in no hurry to take the item for himself, but he was going to take everything to the association, and its members would decide for themselves how to properly distribute the items among the participants of the raid. But not everyone liked this idea. A player showed up who wanted to buy the gloves, and he offered a decent amount of money, 90% of the original estimated value of the item. Moreover, the man was going to pay in cash right here and now, and he was also part of a group of special players who bought all the items that dropped from bosses. This raised questions, at least for the main character, who really didn't like this man. Yes, and not everyone will carry a suitcase full of money, but this one brought it and was ready to pay just to get the item. But the power of money was stronger than common sense, and Zhu Yong was ready to cast aside all doubts and take his share in money right now. On this note, the main character decided to quit for now and return to his original plan, healing. However, the latest event showed that there is no point in settling for little. One must earn at least 1,000,000 won. And the guy found himself some special armor, and it cost as much as an entire island. He needed this armor, but he had no money, so he urgently needed to earn money. But things weren't going very well, despite the fact that after the training mission of killing the boss, he could now absorb their skills, which was already a big plus. And if so, then while there were no clients, you could go and spend the accumulated status points. It would have been really good to become a swordsman, but for now he was quite weak, so he invested points into magic. After such simple manipulations, he received a reward from the system, and now he had 2 attempts to copy instead of 1. And also, a new additional feature was unlocked, a daily task. That is, the guy will have to complete 1 task per day and copy the same skill twice, but the guy had no idea what effect this would have. He decided to test this on the light of healing, because it was quite possible that if he copied this skill a second time, it would become significantly stronger. So he didn't think twice and copied the skill again. Moreover, after rewriting the skill, the protagonist got the jackpot, and now he came up with a new way to make a lot of money by offering a 5% experience buff service that lasts for 5 hours straight, and it doesn't cost that much, only 1,000,000 won. But there were no people willing to buy the service from the guy. Everyone thought it was some kind of scam, and probably no one would have dared to buy it, but at that moment, a magician girl approached the main character. It was his old friend who again invited the guy to hunt together. This offer was again very tempting, because it was difficult to refuse such a beautiful girl. Nevertheless, the main character gathered courage and strength, and again refused her, because now he was trying to work, and he had no time for hunting. The only problem was that he couldn't even find his first client. No one wanted to get involved in such a dubious adventure, but she and her brother were ready to provide him with a similar service, to buy 2 buffs, but he would have to go hunting with them accordingly. The young man really couldn't refuse such an offer, so he took them to a secluded corner and used his new ability. The girl and the guy did not feel any particular changes in their condition yet, but nevertheless they took advantage of the opportunity and gave the main character their business card, asking him to call her back as soon as possible. Moreover, when she left with her brother, she gave the young man a little free advertising, saying that his service was not a scam or a fraud, but that everything really worked, just as he said. After such advertising, a huge number of clients flocked to him, all of whom wanted to get a magical buff, even if only for 5 hours. Money poured down on the protagonist like rain, and he was incredibly grateful to Hiju for the trust and advertising. Meanwhile, the girl and her brother walked through the park in complete silence and thoughtfulness. The young man did not understand why his sister continued to run after a newbie who did not even have normal equipment. She didn't want to repeat the same information over and over again because they had already discussed this point many times. But nevertheless, she reminded her brother that in their team she takes too much damage. He is a strong tank, which allows you to maintain balance. But there is one big minus. They lack a healer. And Zhu Yong even has an unheard-of buff, and there is also a high probability that he has a very useful and unique feature, which will be very beneficial for them. But the young man was worried that their new acquaintance was still, and newcomers often cause big problems. But the girl was adamant, because she understood that since their new acquaintance was a newcomer, the others had not yet seen the potential in him, and they could be the first to win him over to their side, while they had already entered the area where they were attacked by a crowd of monsters. She didn't think long and used Firestorm on the creatures. The monsters died, the smoke began to clear, and the girl was in a good mood, believing that no one could predict which of the newcomers would become an excellent ranker and under what circumstances. Meanwhile, Zhu Yan had finished his trade, having earned enough money to return to the store, where he had found some excellent new equipment, which he now not only tried on and looked at for himself, but also bought. Moreover, now he understood perfectly well that passive income was much better than regular work income, where you had to go to work every day and endure the changing moods of the employer and the client. At that moment, a window appeared offering to increase the level, which the main character took advantage of. Now his passive income from the second level moved to the third and gave a monetary reward. Now experience points will accumulate even if the main character does nothing. And to get the second level of the feature, 2,000 SP were required, which he still needs to earn. And to get the second level of the daily quest, he needed 3,000 SP, which was already a bit difficult. And for the third level of copying a skill, he needs 4,000 SP, which is also not very inspiring. However, SP can also be obtained through the means of completing daily quests, a total of 9,800. So if he gets 200 points a day, he only needs to wait 49 days, and then he will achieve his goal. But in order for the daily quest to go smoothly, you needed basic stats, and for that you had to go on a raid on the boss. And his recent advertising and disguise as a hidden master could help him with this. And yes, perhaps this card would have played if he had not chosen an area for his new task that is located in the middle of a muddy shoal. On such a landscape, melee warriors and tanks would be useless. Their legs, like those of the main character, would be stuck in an incomprehensible slush called Earth. This place was not like the previous one where he had defeated his first boss. Perhaps the reason for this was that most newbies go here to improve their skills. Yes, and if there was no area level limit, he wouldn't have to put in so much effort just to collect the boss's souls. But what we have is what we have. Initially, the guy was positive because the raid on the Shadow Bear went quite well and quickly, but after some time he was no longer happy that he went on this raid. He really wanted to go home. And by and large, no one wanted to get involved in catching the boss. The guys pestered the girls, flirted, and the main character stood aside and sulked. And he had every reason for this. Not only did the guys not accept him into their friendly company, but they also mistook him for a girl, based on his changed nickname. But not one main character was lucky with the attention of girls. There was another young man who also stood aside, deprived of female attention, which went to the saccharine blonde. Having talked with the girls, the young man decided to turn his attention to the others and talk about business. The young man really hoped that each of his new acquaintances had already become familiar with the strategy they had developed before, but he was nevertheless ready to explain the details one more time. Everyone should have understood that the boss of Gararim Bay is a mudflat crab which gets stronger each time and hits with a debuff, so the party members should not use any supplements to avoid making their life difficult. Moreover, this crab can use bleeding on players and then they can die from blood loss. Moreover, the use of debuffs increases the characteristics of the crab, or if they reach a certain value, he will be able to use his special skill, which I really don't want. While everyone was pondering the information they had heard, the main character thought that perhaps the increase in characteristics from debuffs was this crab's special skill. And if so, then this raid will be much more productive and interesting than the guy expected. And so the fight began. The blonde, however, was not so bad, and dealt slashing blows to the monsters that appeared in his path. But the most interesting thing was that even though the big crab was taking damage, it was scattering small shells on the ground that were just itching to bite people. And these shells had to be destroyed first. The main character did not like this approach to business because he was used to acting differently, and despised people who consider themselves omnipotent, killing monsters that are more like ingredients for soup. But everything was not so simple, and after some time a new monster appeared from underground which should not have been here, and now the blonde boy was scared, because up until this moment he had been brave and said that he would protect everyone because he was a great hero, a veteran. And now he was ready to run away if there was such an opportunity. It was clear that the crab appeared only after a certain number of monster corpses had accumulated, and now it was necessary to begin an active defense, and it was advisable to use attacks from a long distance. Therefore, a huge number of arrows flew at him, hitting the target right on target. But that was not the end. Because the main character had not yet entered the battle, he was waiting for the main dish to appear, which did not take long to arrive. The monster was approaching the players. Now they had to coordinate their actions and keep in formation so as not to become its lunch. And when most of the players were horrified, the main character smiled cheerfully because he had familiarized himself with the main characteristics of the monster, and now he understood that he had come to the right place at the right time to hit the jackpot. The players were confident that the monster would only move in two directions, but they were seriously mistaken. After all, to their great regret, this monster could move in different directions, and this became obvious during his new attack. And while most players were panicking, The main character was thinking that if the skill description does not have conditions or duration of its use, then this skill is always active. In addition, this passive skill increases stats according to the number of buffs and debuffs received. Meanwhile, the blonde leader of the group ordered his men to use only physical attacks in the fight against the monster. The boys didn't have to be persuaded for long. They all raised their bows and fired arrows at the monster. It was a good strategy overall, and there were enough people to carry it out, but they were too slow to defeat the boss. However, under the prolonged effect of the attack, the monster received some damage, but this damage was not enough for it to die, so the leader of the group decided to enter the battle. But before that, he asked his girlfriend to use her special buff on him. But from the outside, it looked a little inappropriate and strange. So the main character thought that it would be better for them to do their indecent things at home and not on the battlefield. But he didn't expect that the effect of the girl's buff would be so powerful and not comparable to the love game. Moreover, the characteristics of this skill were sky high, so it was no wonder that the blonde looked so confident that he could defeat the boss of this area. At that moment, the main character remembered how recently a saleswoman in a store asked him if he was broadcasting live his trips to the region. He tried to deny this fact, as he was afraid that she would recognize him from several videos that he had made and posted on one of the social networks, but he did not need publicity yet. But the girl didn't recognize him, but she heard that it is now very popular to film videos of your trips to the region and upload them to social networks, so she assumed that the young man was also doing this. And in their store, there was just the perfect artifact for him, with the help of which he could record all his adventures in the region in excellent quality, and thus she talked him into buying this very item. And now the main character was very worried about the fact that he had only acquired one and could only record the boss's skill, although now he would not mind recording the skill of his new acquaintances. The girl's skill was truly unique and useful in battle, but the guy couldn't understand what a player of that level was doing in such a seedy raid. But he didn't have time to think about it. Now it was interesting to watch what the leader of their group would do, how he would distract the crab onto himself. But before that, he asked the main character to damage the monster, and without thinking twice, he shot a fireball at the enemy. The blonde didn't expect to see this, but Zhu Yan didn't really care about his opinion, because he was ready to take the main dish for himself and not share it with others. After all, he had been keeping his trump card up his sleeve for quite a long time just for this moment. And after the fireball, there was a fire explosion, in which it was unlikely that anyone could survive. The other players couldn't figure out what had just happened. The only thing that didn't escape their notice was the strange smell that penetrated their nostrils. The pasho was as if someone had cooked crab soup and put the meat in a claw on top. The aroma was so delicious and excited the taste buds, causing profuse salivation. This was, by the way, not surprising, since the boss was simply fried due to the main character's attack, and if one had the desire and courage, one could eat him. But since the blonde didn't manage to show off his abilities in battle, he decided to say it like that, to have the last word, ordering everyone to step aside because the ship could come to life and cause irreparable harm to someone, after which he rushed into the attack. But the monster had been dead for a long time, and the leader's final blow played no role, and he kept chopping and chopping the already dead crab from which various objects fell out, and the other players silently watched this act of despair. The only one who was on the blonde's side was his girlfriend, who encouraged him, while the main character looked at all this with an undisguised smile, realizing how pathetic it all looked. Besides, he got everything he wanted from this raid. Now he needed to go back and check how the radiation forces and resistance changes interact. Then he would get the perfect version of skills. And since everything was like that, it was necessary to finish here as soon as possible and return home. But he couldn't leave peacefully, because most of his new acquaintances wanted to continue communicating with him. Someone asked for his phone number. Someone wanted to go sit in some bar. Others thanked him for the fact that with his help, they remained safe and sound and were able to easily absorb the boss's soul. The blonde didn't like this kind of attention at all, so he asked everyone to come to him, because it was necessary to distribute the items that fell out of the monster. But no one was in a hurry to approach him. Moreover, the girl who had always been on his side now believed that most of the items should have gone to other players, including the main character, and not to her beloved blonde. Moreover, most of the guys were ready to give their share of the winnings to the young man, because he actually did all the dirty work for them. A man in a black suit was watching all this, and after a quick glance at the battlefield, he realized that the boss had not dropped any unique items this time, so he received an order to go to the next raid site and check the situation there. He left. The guys also began to disperse, and Hyoju stood next to the blonde with a serious, wary, and thoughtful look. Something was definitely bothering her, but the girl hadn't yet realized exactly what it was. But the main character, instead of going to the hotel, moved to another area, where he hunted monsters again. Since no one canceled the daily task, it had to be completed on time, and he did it for quite a long time, so he soon got tired and fell on the grass. He understood that in order to reach the third level, he needed to actively complete tasks, and the combo of changing resistance and radiation power, although it gave fantastic stats, also created new problems for him. Now he had the second level of copying skills, and accordingly, he did not have enough attempts at this very copying, although his characteristics were increasing. But at the same time, the number of skills that he could use in active combat did not increase. And to fix this situation, he needed SP. But these same SP were hard to get by completing daily tasks. But what if you think about it, there is one kind administrator who could give him an interesting task with a generous reward and ease his difficult fate. But on the other hand, it wasn't a very good idea, but completing the main task was quite acceptable, which appeared so conveniently. Only in a matter of seconds it erased the hope for a good end to the day. It was too early for him to rejoice. Everything could not have been so simple. At that very moment, a special area appeared, the Sky Island of Kanel. The main task also sounded uninspiring. He had to clear a special area, and clearly not from dust, but from exceptional and terrible monsters, and there were very, very many of these monsters. If the main character fails to complete this task, then not only will he not receive the required points, but all of humanity will be destroyed. The situation was truly at its worst. Martial law was declared in the country, and people were asked not to leave safe places, since the pillars of light that they could see were special portals through which monsters could enter the city. So the association took control of the actions of the population and players into their own hands. Airports were also closed, and all flights were canceled to minimize damage. The association needed to act even faster before the monsters filled the entire city, and all players from level 1 to level 39 could participate in the raid. The worst thing was that this was not a local problem, but a global one, as similar portals opened up all over the world. The same fate befell Japan, for example, where a region the size of South Korea appeared. Ju Yan returned to the city and was now studying all the news reports and also listening to the conversations around him. And what he read and listened to inspired horror, since level 70 monsters were now roaming Tokyo, which meant that similar ones could soon appear in Seoul, and only players of at least level 41 could fight such monsters. At that moment, he heard one of the association's representatives giving an interview, saying that they were receiving active support from the government, so they would soon finish their preparations and be able to send their people on a raid in Tokyo. They also planned to gather as much information as possible about the monsters they would have to deal with in order to create the perfect strategy for clearing Kanel Island, and they were also accepting volunteers into their ranks, whose services they would generously pay. It all sounded beautiful, but Ju Yong understood that underneath the beautiful wrapper, there was a real mess. However, he was going to take an active part in this mess and clear out the special area, as he needed the SP points that he would receive after completing the main quest. But before going to the association, the guy came to a familiar store, as he needed one very valuable item, the cursed mana ring. But in addition to the ring, the seller offered him to buy a set of items, a ring and a bracelet. He understood that buying the set would be a pretty good decision. After all, it would be better to focus on magic, even though the other characteristics would drop a little. But it was an expensive pleasure, and the guy felt sorry to spend an extra penny. Nevertheless, he bought the artifacts and left the store with a proud look, not having decided to buy a full set of armor as well. So having changed into what he had, the guy came to the portal, where other players had already gathered. The atmosphere was oppressive, and Ju Yong was not in the best mood, as he had to buy a camera with the last of his money, since wearing glasses in the new domain would be problematic. But that was only one reason. The second was that the main character had read reviews about the floating island, and they were terrible. Only now he began to understand that he was in a very bad way. However, he pushed all negative thoughts aside and walked briskly into the portal, hoping that all this was just gossip of losers. And in just a moment, he found himself on an island that amazed with its riot of colors and nature. If it weren't for the monsters, the guy would have been ready to stay here. The island was so beautiful. But everything only seemed nice, calm, and beautiful. But as soon as he raised his head up, he saw in the clutches of a huge bird a man whom it wanted to eat for lunch. The guy was still alive, crying and asking for help, but soon he fell silent as the expected end came to him, and Juyan realized that in this situation he could only rely on the fireballs. He waited for the griffin to fly closer so he could roast it, but no one was going to fly up to him. Moreover, all the monsters flew past him and attacked another player. And as soon as the guy took a closer look, he realized that the monsters had attacked Hiju and her brother. But for now, they managed to maintain a protective barrier and keep the monsters away. True, their strength might not last long, so the girl cast Firestorm. It was so powerful that it fried all the griffins that attacked her. It was great, although it was energy-consuming, but now the main character understood that in front of him was not just a strong player, but a very strong one. But even someone like her couldn't let her guard down, since there were many different monsters here, and her brother didn't want her to get seriously hurt. This became a trigger for the girl. She got angry, because if a healer had gone with them on the last raid, nothing bad would have happened to her. Every day she felt more and more regret that she couldn't persuade the main character to join their group. And at that moment she turned around, because she heard screams and saw how 2 green slugs began to gnaw the legs of the main character, who could not get rid of them. Yes, the meeting was unexpected, but the girl was in no hurry to help the guy, but teasing him was a sacred thing. Since the main character couldn't cope with the green monsters himself, his friends helped him. He was, of course, grateful to them. But despite this, tears flowed from his eyes because the monsters had managed to ruin his expensive shoes. His brother, Hiji, watched his tossing and turning from the side, and he was even curious whether his sister would be able to persuade the healer to join their team. Looking at her smile, the guy understood perfectly well that she would not deviate from her plan. And he was absolutely right in his guesses, because the girl grabbed the main character's hand, saying that fate itself favored them, so they met again and were obliged to help each other in the current life situation. But the main character was only going to quietly and calmly hunt alone, so he was not entirely comfortable when the girl grabbed his hand, and he even asked her to let him go. But he hoped in vain that she would listen to him and let him go, because the girl had caught her prey and was going to hold her tightly. If this is the case, then the young man basically has no choice and will have to somehow come to terms with the current situation. But before that, he still decided to buy himself a little time and copy at least one skill, even if it was healing, so he needed to retire, which surprised his companions. But he didn't get a chance to be alone, because the next second a whole flock of griffins flew at them, carrying a huge boulder in their paws for an attack. Not even a split second had passed before the first stones hit the tank's shield. He steadfastly held the line, covering the main character and his sister with himself. At this point, the protagonist realized that these monsters were intelligent. They analyzed the situation and took a creative approach, and this was a problem. But this was not the only problem for the people. A pack of rhinoceros-like monsters was rushing towards them from behind, and they also needed to be dealt with somehow. And the young man decided to do this if he had time, of course. But while he was thinking, Hiji entered the battle. To hold back the monsters and prevent them from advancing forward, she used a wall of fire, and to help her brother she sent a fire rain on the griffins. But at some point she noticed that the fire rain would not be enough, so she added a fire spear to it. This time the fight was more difficult, but she nevertheless did an excellent job. The girl was pleased with herself, but her brother was extremely displeased with her, because he had already asked her 100 times not to run ahead and not to try to do everything alone. But she did not listen to him and did it her own way. He would have groaned for a long time and tried to prove his point to the girl, but the main character intervened in the conversation, asking if every S-class player really had so many skills that they could use in battle. And indeed, this was the pure truth which Hiji did not hide. True, she learned most of them by buying skill books and studying them in her spare time. This was definitely good news, since anyone could, if they wanted to and had the money, buy the book and study it. But the guy didn't have the money. But he didn't get to think about it for too long, because another monster jumped out of the nearest Kalyuja and attacked their small group. But this time, he didn't get to show himself, because the tank and the witch took on all the dirty work. But he still managed to seize the moment and throw a fireball at the monster. He hit the target right on target. But the problem was that if before his fireballs were small in size, or at least average, now his fireball was simply huge. And this raised many questions in the girl, one of which was that she had already begun to doubt that this was a healer and not a magician. So he had to come up with a true story for her, which was that any self-respecting healer should have defensive skills that were necessary to increase their level and qualification. But this answer did not satisfy Hiji. She asked how much mana the guy had, but he answered this question evasively. At the same time, he understood that he had quite a large amount of mana, and he could use his skill about 13 more times, but since he was now a healer, not a mage, he had to be more careful because the tank was already looking at him too suspiciously. In addition, other players were looking at them very closely, so the main character had to be extremely careful and not attract unnecessary attention. And it was easier said than done. Besides, other players were busy killing small green monsters, and they didn't really want to do it anymore. And they weren't getting any bigger fish, and they weren't strong enough. However, they could also fetch a certain amount of money, but no money would shine if they suddenly missed the appearance of flying monsters. But for now, everything was calm, and the unfamiliar group of players believed that they had come all the way to the island in vain, since they were engaged in catching weaklings, which humiliated their dignity. It sounded proud, so one could calmly attack a stronger monster and die, but one didn't want that either. Only there no one expected, except probably the main character, that the number of killed monsters already on the island was large, and this was one of the conditions for awakening the boss of this territory, who just awakened. After this area he looked impressive, somewhat reminiscent of an angel, although it is unlikely that he had such holy and good intentions. Although, if you look at the situation from his side, he had the right to avenge all the killed monsters, so he immediately attacked the players with the heavenly sword. And if most of the players did not understand what was happening now, the main character was perfectly aware that they had nowhere to run from the attack of the area's defeat zone. Even Brother Hiji found it extremely difficult to withstand such pressure. Hundreds of sharp blades tried to break through the guy's defense at the same time. But his situation was not the worst, but the other players were much less fortunate, and their chances of surviving with such wounds were slim. Yes, and one of the swords hit the guy in the leg, so he didn't have the strength to hold the shield. But the wound in his leg was not their last problem. The boss's attack had caused all his stats to drop to the limits of possible values. It was a good thing it wouldn't last longer than 10 minutes, but during that time, Ju Yong planned to heal the tank's wounds. This was correct, however. The monster was not going to give them a break and was preparing to attack again. And in such a situation, I didn't want to be brave, but I really wanted to run home. The news that the Sky Island boss had appeared due to the number of monsters killed spread throughout the world at the speed of light. His appearance alone both delighted and frightened players, but left no one indifferent. But after meeting him, few could survive because he was not distinguished by his humanity. And no one could dodge his omnipresent sharp swords, and if they could, then not for long. Moreover, the players did not yet know that this monster could pump power out of them, so now they were completely perplexed, because many no longer had the strength to hold a sword in their hands. Only now they began to understand that this was some kind of debuff and they had nothing to counter it with. Even the smallest green monsters began to experience strange behavior after they were affected by the main monster. And what appeared in their place did not look cute and harmless. Newly born huge green beetles, somewhat similar to dragonflies, attacked people. This was not a sight for the faint of heart. So after watching the video, the main character sat in complete horror, staring at the dark screen. Now he realized that he had made an excellent decision when he had forced his friends to flee the battlefield and not try to defeat the boss. After all, this is life, not a game. In the game, he would have extra lives, but here, he did not have such. And considering all the debuffs, he also needs to increase his physical characteristics if he wants to clear the Sky Island. At that moment, the phone rang. It was Hiji calling him, and it was unexpected and exciting. She was curious to know if the young man had returned to Sky Island after their last foray there. The guy said that he hadn't returned there yet, but he would have to drop in there soon anyway, because he had some problems due to the fact that he still couldn't recognize and analyze the boss's behavior. Moreover, people were now talking about the monsters leaving the Sky Island that formed over Japan and moving to Seoul, and this means that it is time to pull themselves together and begin active military operations if they do not want their city to turn into ruins. Moreover, information was received that a full-scale raid on the Sky Island had been formed, and the girl invited the main character to join it. A few days later, many players gathered near Seoul Park to take part in the raid. It turned out that among the regular players, there were also high-ranking players who came for the so-called interview before the start of the raid. It was clear that they were very strong, and the foray into the D-rank area was a kind of warm-up for them. But the question arose as to how strong a player one had to be a worthy competitor to them. And so the main character was shaking with fear. not understanding what he was doing here and how he could compare with them without giving himself away. He even deliberately put on clothes that were different from the ones he fought in as a mage, so that no one would suspect him of anything, since everyone in their city knew the psychopath. At this moment, Hee-ji noticed him and called him over. It was not appropriate for him to stand aside if she had offered him this adventure. The young man himself did not understand what he was doing here, because the terms of the contract clearly stated that players with at least rank B could take part in the raid, and he had rank E, so his presence here looked a little strange. But the girl didn't believe him at all. After all, what F-rank healer would use an S-rank healing skill? So, in her humble opinion, he shouldn't worry about prosaic things. He would be included in the team anyway. So there was no need to worry about it. At that moment, the raid leader, number 1 of your guild, SS rank warrior Hye Seong, appeared in the clearing. He believed that before sending them to the Sky Island, the abilities of each participant who wanted to take part in the cleansing had to be tested. Therefore, the first thing they will do is warm up, and obviously not on the sports field, but in the nearest region. It was a great idea. In Heeja's opinion, she even wanted to go and stretch her legs and take revenge on the man for the last time. What exactly happened that very last time, she did not tell, but only mysteriously winked at her new friend. But the main character didn't want to go anywhere, because he understood that this man emanated a dangerous aura. He dominated with just his gaze, and his intonations struck not only by his rude attitude towards people, but also by the power that he hid. But no one asked his opinion, and in a few seconds all those who wanted to were in the region. The main character was closely watching every movement of the warrior, realizing how cool he was. But watching the battle won't do him any good, and with only low base stats he can't compare in skill to this man, and the fact that he's still alive is all thanks to the Ring of Elements. Without it, he would have met his ancestors long ago. Yes, and if you think about it, the guy had never held a sword in his hands. But looking at Hye-sun, he had a rather familiar feeling inside, as if he too could move like a man, also chop, stab, cut through the air and the bodies of monsters with the sharp edge of his sword. But now he needed to suppress this desire and start treating the wounded. Because he was a healer, albeit formally. But someday he would find a way to increase physical characteristics, and then he would definitely return to this issue. Meanwhile, the warrior, without fear of reproach or unnecessary movements, cut down the monsters one after another. And this picture continued to excite the consciousness of the main character, when suddenly he heard such a familiar, but such a distant voice, which told him that it would be a pity to hide with his skills, that he needed to prove himself, to show what he was capable of. It was so strange, so unusual, but so right that the guy froze, not knowing how to react to what had happened. But the solution came immediately. Not even a solution, but an impulse, a guess. He found an incredible skill that instantly increases physical characteristics, and all thanks to the man who stood before him in the blood of his enemies. The small monsters were defeated in the meantime, but a huge and terrible boss of the area emerged from the swamp. The players were taken aback and confused, as they saw a poisonous royal lizard, and it was better to neutralize it before it attacked them. And while the others were just trying to come to their senses and come up with a suitable attack or combination, Hye-sung didn't think, but acted, attacking his enemy first. The man turned out to be more agile than the monster, so the first blow was his, and black blood splashed in all directions, painting the ground with its color. Seconds later, it became clear that the man was able to kill his opponent with one blow, so the monster's soul was absorbed by all the players who took an active part in the raid. Hee-ji also made a significant contribution to killing small monsters, so she was proud of herself, although in fact this was a slight exaggeration. At this point, it dawned on the protagonist that rewards could be obtained even if someone was not hunting on their own, but was only present on the battlefield. After all, usually if someone doesn't contribute to the raid, they don't get any rewards, but the young man used debuffs throughout the raid, and it was counted as assistance. With that, the check and warm-up was over, and Hee-sung was about to give the final briefing before distributing the participation rewards. He said that previously the magicians quickly appeared together and attacked simultaneously, but they had not yet determined exactly what kind of defense the monsters would use, so they could not yet calculate the type of their attacks because they could be either magical or physical. Therefore, he did not intend to divide all players based on the method of dealing damage at a distance, magical or physical, But by and large, the main character did not listen to his commander because his thoughts were far away from here, and he was glad that he managed to copy the bloody Bibzumia skill of his new commander because it helps to increase attack power limits and other things. Several days had passed since that memorable day, and there was only one day left before the raid on the Sky Island, and all this time the protagonist had been training, so he felt mortally tired. Until that day, he had diligently completed daily quests, such as defeating 30 different monsters, for which he received a reward, or collecting 30 horns of 3-horned oxen, for which he also received a reward, and much, much more. But the price of these quests was quite mundane. Quite a few days passed at this pace. He had no time to rest at all, but he was still very lucky to have consecutive E-rank missions, and it could have been worse. But since the heavens themselves were somehow magically helping him all the time, he needed to take advantage of the moment and pump up a sample of a new skill. Basically, its original purpose was to increase attack power through outstanding strength and resistance change, and then release explosive damage. But when Santa gave him Blood Madness, everything changed, and 3 attempts to copy it were no longer enough, because what if the Bloody Woman's madness had outstanding strength and resistance changes? It would definitely have formed with energy far superior to the original. In that case, it would be nice to be able to copy 4 skills, but for now these were just plans and dreams. In any case, he could only use 3 skills now, which was already a good result. By and large, he had already achieved the desired goal, so he went to the region to confirm and consolidate the result obtained. Right now was the perfect time to try out the enhanced attack. No one was interfering, and there were plenty of test rabbits on hand. But all his attempts to test new skills caused complete chaos and confusion among other players, who did not like the fact that the main character appeared and destroyed everything around. Even now the main boss of the new dungeon was after him, although he was originally the target of other players. But the snake had no chance, since the main character's fireball was too big and all-consuming, and if anyone were to become dinner today, it would definitely not be a human. But the monster was still alive, and the main character was purposefully heading towards the other players, and he did it too quickly and deftly. Well, it would be fine if he himself ran to them, but the boss of the region followed the guy on his heels, so other people fell under his hungry jaws. But Julian didn't leave them to their fate, even though he could have, and he blasted the monster with a fireball, after which he began to run away again because the snake practically kept up with him, and it took effort to run away and attack at the same time. However, even while running, he managed to inflict damage on the area boss. By and large, this number of attacks should have been enough for the monster to die, but it was tenacious and full of strength. Meanwhile, Al arrived at his home, where his assistant met him and informed him that the schedule of inspection of the regions was completed. The man had only 1 hour and 24 minutes of free time before traveling to the next region. At that moment, the girl noticed that her boss was watching a video about a psychopath and thought that he was too interested in it. It was the pure truth, because that was exactly why he gave the guy his precious ring to this young man. The assistant didn't understand why her boss was so sure that the psychopath and Zhu Yan were one and the same person. It was quite an interesting question. Besides, it was necessary to think about the fact that from the very moment the guy got the elemental ring, he had a very strong jump in the growth of skills, although the ring by and large does not affect either agility or endurance, but now he dodges all attacks with small, dexterous movements. All this adds up to the picture that the young man has a lot of combat experience, but it was unclear where the newcomer got it from. But that was a pleasant thing. But the news was not pleasant either. The man wanted to know everything, especially if it concerned Riders Guild. It turned out that these guys were discovered near special areas. This didn't surprise Al, so he ordered his assistant to continue to monitor the riders and the psychopath, as he needed more information to get a complete picture of what was happening. Meanwhile, not only Al was watching the actions of the main character, but also someone else. The man grinned, not expecting to see someone so interesting, fearless, and willing to show off in a low-ranking realm. Meanwhile, Zhu Yan finished his raid and was ready to return, but as soon as he read the latest news, he became angry because he did all the dirty work, but others received all the rewards. In addition, the idea occurred to him that it would be much better if he himself posted a video of his raid on his channel. So he decided to go through channel verification and upload a video from his camera. Moreover, he began to come up with a far-reaching plan in which he creates a separate account, uploads videos there under interesting titles, gains 1 million subscribers, and bathes in gold. But that was a little later, and now he needed to try and collect the items that had fallen from the monsters. But doing this in the dark was not so easy. But he had to get down to business right now. After all, this was a mandatory task, although earlier it seemed to him that they were all of a lower rank. Besides, he was a little offended that he had spent the whole day destroying some snake, and now he felt tired and his body ached. But be that as it may, it was time to collect the items. Otherwise, he was too lost in thought and wasting time. And bingo, the first of the 20 items lay not far from him under a tree, invitingly glittering blue in the moonlight. The fact that he now understood what he needed to look for was a plus, but the big minus was that the region was huge, and he had no idea where to look for the rest of the items because they could be anywhere. This didn't inspire him at all, and if the task hadn't been B rank, he would have gone home long ago. And if it seemed to him that everything was bad, then he was wrong. It became bad now, when a huge bird of prey attacked him from behind. But somehow, magically, he managed to dodge the swift attack. The guy didn't understand how he managed to do this, and he was very scared. His body moved on its own, even before his brain gave him the command, which meant the guy had trained and combined different skills for a reason. But he decided to analyze the situation later. Now the main thing was to get rid of the obstacle, and the fireball would help him. But this attracted unnecessary attention to his person. The other hunters were surprised that their colleagues were hunting at such a late hour. These guys also had their own business in the domain. They wanted to kill the boss of the Sky Island themselves, take all the rewards for themselves, so that Hai Song could go home and with what, and now they were going to do this. But the worst thing was that this group was going to play dirty and kill any players who tried to stop them. The main character didn't even know about all this, and was happy like a child that he had almost finished his task, which meant he could go home. Moreover, he was confident that he would be able to sort everything out before midnight. He had to find the last item, but at that moment the guy realized that something went wrong. And not just wrong, but colossally wrong, because Ju Yong did not expect to see the boss attacked by the players. The main character didn't understand what was going on here because they had agreed to go on a raid the following morning. And then this happened. A huge number of arrows and magical attacks flew at the monster, but he did not worry and seemed to be waiting for it. The guy didn't know what to do with all this. It was too late to call anyone, and if everything continued at this pace, these people would steal his boss. But if you think about it, his task only said that he needed to kill the boss and clear the area, but it didn't say with whom, how, or when to do it. So, should he be the one to deliver the finishing blow to the monster, or should he give that honor to someone else? So he decided to sit and watch what was happening, and suddenly he saw that the boss had fallen and was surrounded by players. And this solution seemed excellent to him, and the view from his place was excellent. Only the mercenaries were very unlucky, because now the boss became 100 times more dangerous than he was before, and all his attacks were their sentence. The monster's attack raised dust, and the main character did not see what was happening in the clearing, but he was sure that everything was already over, so he decided to go up and take a look. And it was his mistake, because the boss scattered all the players like rag dolls. Those guys who survived the last attack knew they needed to regroup and come up with a new battle strategy. At that moment, one of those guys approached Ju Yon because the guy couldn't move from his place watching all this. Since he lifted someone else's mask, these guys accepted him as one of their own. And since that was the case, they dragged him along with them to the battlefield, and the main character did not dare refuse them, even though he did not understand how he could get himself into something like that. But since everything turned out this way, he had an excellent opportunity to fulfill his main task. Meanwhile, people tried to defeat the boss in close combat. But to him, their attacks were like mosquito bites, so he easily fought them off. Ju Yong, as always, threw fireballs at the monster, realizing that he was in trouble, and he didn't yet know how to get out of this situation. Because of the buff, his firepower was too great, but he couldn't not use his skills, because they would start to consider him a planted Cossack. So he continued throwing fireballs at the enemy, and he even began to enjoy it a little. Besides, if he continues like this, he will be able to take all the rewards for himself in the end. But the guy rejoiced too soon, as the boss used his summoning skill to gather an army of monsters around him. The monsters were arriving, and along with them, players who were supposed to take part in tomorrow's raid suddenly appeared on the clearing. And this was bad, first of all for themselves, because the people in masks were not going to share the spoils with anyone. And as soon as ordinary players came closer, they were killed. After all, the masked men didn't want Hai Song to find out about their dirty deeds, since they didn't need any extra problems. Ju Yong watched this terrible scene of death and murder. He was paralyzed by fear, disbelief, and disgust. He could not believe what he saw. It would be fine if this guild simply stole the boss. It happens. But killing other players just like that is too much. But for better or worse, at that moment Hai Song appeared in the clearing with other guys. And from the expression on the man's face, the protagonist realized that he would be in big trouble if he was caught. However, the leader of the masked men considered himself the smartest and the strongest, so he expressed his dissatisfaction in a rude manner and asked why Hee Seong was interfering with his raid. But he shouldn't have acted like that, because he had a ghost of a chance to escape and survive. But he missed it, because Hai Song was going to execute him for killing innocent players right here and now. After which he attacked people in masks, driven by the desire to kill. And while the main character stood aside, not interfering in what was happening, the other guys decided to confront his friends and acquaintances. And while the main character was thinking about who to join, the boss attacked the people again. And then everything got mixed up. People killed people, monsters killed everyone they saw. At that moment, Ju Yong realized that he needed to kill the boss, and quickly, so that this chaos would stop. But he didn't yet know how to do it. But while he was thinking, the boss was attacked by Hai Sung. He was supported by Heejer using a fire spear. The sister was protected from attacks by green monsters by her brother, but he could not protect the girl from the insidious people who decided to attack her from behind. The main character could no longer allow this, so he killed the man with his fire attack. She didn't expect that any of her opponents would want to protect her. It was very strange and unexpected. Time flew inexorably forward. The main character understood that he needed to hold on a little longer, and then this nightmare would end. By hook or by crook, the guy waited until midnight. Now he could copy any skill. And his choice fell on Hai Sung's bloody fight. So now he could combine it with a fireball, which he did, and killed 20 monsters in one attack. And then everything started to happen as if in a fog. The guy kept killing and killing the monsters that came his way. Now he had enough strength to kill the boss. After the main character's last attack, the boss was left without his weapon and limbs. But even after that, he was still alive. And within a minute, he was standing on his feet, summoning a new weapon, moving into the final stage. After which he attacked the people. The tank was able to cover his sister with a shield. The other players who fell under his attack were so unlucky, and nothing was left of them. The main character also found himself in the affected area. He understood perfectly well that if he couldn't hold on, it would be the end for him. But he was very lucky, because the tank dragged him under its dome. But it did this not out of the kindness of its heart, but by making the guy its debtor. After the boss's last attack, all that remained was scorched earth and a huge hole in the middle of which he stood. However, he was alive and well, and so far has not attacked people anymore. But to his great regret, there were still a few players who were hiding behind the shield and were also alive and well. Now it's the protagonist's turn to attack the main boss with his signature fireball. But this time the fireball was even bigger than the previous one, and the boss had no way to defend himself against such a force. He looked at the man, realizing that this was the last moment of his life. The shockwave from this attack reached the other players, who tried to hold on and not fly away in an unknown direction. But unlike the people, the monster was still alive but fell to its knees. But the more time passed, the more clearly everyone began to understand that he had died after all, as various objects appeared around him. Now the logical question arose as to who should get these very items, the people in masks or the followers of Hae Sun. The knight knew that these things were his to keep. So he raised his sword and said that if the masked man and his men wanted to live, they must leave this place. Otherwise he would be forced to kill them. But the blonde wasn't going to give in to the brunette. He was sure that it was their mage who dealt the finishing blow, so the items had to belong to them. At this point, the main character received a message from the system that he had completed the main task and would be moved to the training area in 10 seconds to receive a reward. But before this happens, the young man decided to make everyone present. The mask had long since fallen off his face, so he didn't even hide it anymore. But he claimed that he was the one who killed the boss, which is generally hard to deny. At that moment, the masked man realized that this guy was not from their team, and after taking a closer look, he recognized him as the psychopath everyone was talking about. Meanwhile, the guy took the main item for himself and was not going to give it to anyone. Only the men were unhappy with this development of events. They were ready to kill each other. But now they had a common enemy who took the treasured thing from them along with the tray. It was sad to realize, but the young man really had fooled them. Meanwhile, Ju-yun found himself in a completely incomprehensible place where the system had transferred him. And in this weightless space, he read with delight and some surprise the notifications about the rewards he received for completing this task. There were too many of them to believe in their reality. But that wasn't the most interesting part, because a few seconds later a fairy, a real fairy, appeared in front of him. And she called herself a teaching assistant, not a sorceress. Everything was exactly like that, and she appeared for the reason that he completed his main task. Now she will help him in his further training. Up until this point, the protagonist had never heard of a teaching assistant and had never read about anything like it on the internet. So he concluded that it was exclusive to him as an X-rank user with a unique feature. The first thing she decided to do was to start this process by having the guy receive a reward for completing tasks. The first thing he got was an upgrade to his detail feature, which was a sort of evolution of his first profession. In other words, it adds more aspects to his unique ability. He can also choose one of his abilities and improve its detailed feature, after which he provides the protagonist with a list from which he can choose. And here the young man thought he knew that improving passive income gradually increases the number of experience points gained. It can be considered as a strategic investment. But now he was too weak, because his skills had been reset during that raid on Sky Island. Therefore, at this point, increasing the number of skills used would be the best solution. So he chose a sample under copying skills. So if he was lucky, he would be able to copy 8 times in a day. After this, the assistant suggested that he check the remaining unclaimed awards. The first of these was an item from a random daily quest reward chest, namely a sword engulfed in flames. The sword was beautiful and functional, but it was time to get another reward from the main quest, a random skill master chest. The next reward was an additional detailed feature, namely superiority over the master, which added 1 random option to the copied skills, which was also quite good. But the young man was looking forward to something else, and showed the assistant the reward that had dropped from the boss. It was a cursed necklace that added points to every stat and every item. At this moment, the young man realized that if the boss's item was so good, then what was his skill then? After reading all the characteristics, the guy realized that his opponent was some kind of deity. They were very lucky that he did not have time to activate his last skill, because if he did, it would be completely impossible to kill him. However, what he got was in any case like an extra life with a 30-day cooldown that had to be used wisely. After this, he completed his training, realizing that by receiving all the awards and distributing them correctly, he improved his performance. But even such joyful moments were exhausting, and the young man fell down without strength, but was happy at the same time. But he was a little mistaken, because this was only the first stage of receiving awards, and the training itself should begin now. The assistant reminded the guy about the last sentence of the main task, which he had successfully forgotten. It turned out that he needed to clear a special area for the survival of the Earth and humanity, because if he didn't do it, his entire world would perish due to invaders from other dimensions. While the protagonist was dealing with his personal assistant, journalists were reporting live from the scene, saying that the Sky Island had disappeared after the boss's death, and the country's residents had reclaimed clear sky. The gate connected to the Sky Island has evaporated, but now a space distortion phenomenon is occurring, and the possibility of a repeated mutation of the area cannot be ruled out. Meanwhile, Hai-sung also gave an interview where he said that his unit failed because of a group that intentionally stole their boss. But despite this, the raid on Sky Island was successfully completed, and immediately after the raid, several unknown persons escaped who will need to be found. He also said that the reward for killing the boss was an increase in all stats. On that note, he decided to end the interview, as he didn't want to answer questions about the items that dropped from the boss. Hichi watched this interview like many others at home. Her brother understood that if Hai-sung guessed who the person who killed the boss was and found him, he would kill him on the spot. So they had to warn the main character about this, but no matter how much the girl tried to call him, his phone was out of network coverage. Besides, she understood perfectly well that one could make a logical conclusion that a cape is a standard element of a mage's clothing, but if one takes into account that his main attack is a fireball, then a completely different picture emerged. Suddenly the phone started working, the call went through, and the girl was very happy because she could talk to the guy. And when the guy picked up the phone, she got straight to the point, saying that she noticed that the equipment of the mage who helped her in the last row was very similar to his, so she wanted to talk to him in person, because he disappeared before she had the chance. However, the guy insisted that it wasn't him on the Sky Island, so he now feels terrible that he wasn't invited to the raid. But he couldn't answer her call right away because he was taking a shower, and anyway, it was time for him to go, so he dropped the call. Ju-yeon naively believed that if he answered the girl in a similar tone, she would leave him alone for a while and stop calling and pestering him with stupid conversations. Plus, He had to digest the information he'd received from his mini-assistant, which claimed that his world would soon be destroyed by invaders from other dimensions. But he doesn't need to worry because he has a special power. After all, he is a master of skills. This power changes reality, a gift from the gods, since its action is similar to their powers. This was all well and good, but the young man wanted to know why such power was given to him. The assistant was in no hurry to explain the situation to him, and only asked him not to think too much about it. By and large, it was most likely because he had worked hard for the benefit of people in his time, which is why he received such a wonderful gift. Now he has one last choice to make, which should lead him to the next point. After all, his power is not the true power of a deity, and he is a man who bears the burden of responsibility for saving the planets. And this power can either develop depending on his choice, so that he remains satisfied and concerned only with his survival and his own significance, or he will choose the path of saving the world, and will go down a more difficult path. But he doesn't need to worry too much because saving the world is not a hero's job. This is just one of many choices he can make in the here and now. And so, after such a difficult conversation, the young man returned home, took a bath, and thought about everything that had happened to him recently, because before that, he was the most ordinary young man who did not think about anything in particular and went with the flow. Meanwhile, Hiji conducted research on all the videos she could find online, as well as the events that had been happening recently, and came to the conclusion that her savior was a well-known psychopath. The only problem was that she hadn't found any irrefutable proof, and thinking about it alone was useless, so it was best to meet the guy and talk it over again. Her brother didn't understand such an obsession with this young man. By and large, the girl herself did not understand why the main character was so important to her. Although, on the other hand, she understood that she was in the risk zone every time. So if she was destined to die, then she wanted to be the best in her rank. So she needed someone as extraordinary as a psychopath on her team. But her brother believed that there was no need to think about a psychopath, but rather to give up the habit of acting recklessly, and then everything would be fine. Several days passed, and the brother and sister went hunting in one of the regions in which, according to the girl, the main character was supposed to appear. And, strangely enough, he appeared there, but tried to prove that he ended up there completely by accident, and simply wanted to sell items, and was not thinking about any kind of hunting. But the girl didn't believe this fairy tale at all, and asked him to stop pretending and tell her everything as it was, without hiding anything. The tank was already getting pretty fed up with this squabble, so he offered to pay the main character 501 an hour if only he would stop arguing with his sister and go hunting with them. The main character had nowhere to go, and he agreed to go with a guy and a girl to another area to hunt. Nevertheless, he still had a vague hope that he could get out of it under the pretext that he urgently needed to get to the bushes. But it didn't work. As soon as the girl and the main character were in a certain place, she pointed her staff at him and asked him to confess honestly whether he was the same person as the psychopath and the magician who escaped, but not before saving her life. He started to pretend to be a fool, saying that he didn't understand what she was talking about. The guy demonstrated his stubbornness in every possible way, so the girl decided to approach him from the other side and said that she would like to pay him for the help provided in that form. After all, she works in this below, so she will keep his secret from others. The main character's attempts to deny this became worse and worse, because his companion was absolutely sure that she was right. There was no point in relying on it anymore, so the young man asked his friend not to tell anyone about it so that he wouldn't have any extra problems. They walked along, chatting, not noticing the cobwebs that were everywhere. And it was necessary to do this, because this area was simply teeming with monsters, so it was necessary to concentrate on the road, and not on stupid chatter. Since this is the case, the main character decided to work off his money and clear the way for them to move on. Hiji looked at him with wide eyes, not expecting that the young man also owned a magic sword. But the guy wasn't going to reveal his secrets to the girl completely, but he was very much ready to test what the object in his hands was capable of. It was quite interesting to watch what was happening, especially when the fire sword turned into ice. At that moment, the young man once again realized that it was cool to gain abilities and become a master of skills, because you can use any skills and combine them with each other. So he combined the ice spear and the sword itself for a future attack. Thus, he poisoned the monster with ice spears soaked in magical poison. But he only killed 2 spiders, and a whole horde of them crawled out to meet them. Because of this, the young man had to use a catalyst to form a new attack. The spiders were dead, and the protagonist was happy that he could use ice magic instead of fire, making it difficult to detect him. But the girl also had some questions about this because she considered him a fire mage, not an ice mage. But he answered this question for me, realizing that fireballs lacked damage compared to other types of magic, and something had to be done about it. Overall, the raid ended quite successfully, and now, upon returning home, their small group gathered in a small establishment to relax a little, drink beer, and talk. But this kind of pastime was not in Zhu Yong's plans at all. He would rather return home, rest, lie down, and soak in the bath, rather than all this. He kept remembering the feeling he had experienced in the cave, killing the boss with one blow. It was wonderful and exciting. We Euphoria. Then quickly past the children due to insufficient contribution, failed to paint the soul of the boss of the Spider Queen area. For some reason, it did not fall out. Nevertheless, the girl was ready to take everyone to the establishment after the raid and treat them to some good meat, and it would have been too much trouble to refuse her. Now he realized that it would be best for him to relax and actually drink some beer. But at some point, everything went too far, and Heiji had an offer for Zhu Yon that he couldn't refuse. The girl understood that in the areas danger could come not only from monsters. It often happens that trouble comes from other players. Of course, someone says that this way you can become stronger. But this is a solvable problem. After all, when they hunt boss monsters, they turn into a single living organism that acts together. So there is no point in fooling around and hunting alone. After all, it's difficult and dangerous to get involved with high-level areas alone without a tank and a reliable plan. And on top of that, you need to manage taxes from selling items. Therefore, she offered to take on all these issues and conclude a cooperation agreement with him. Zhu Yan, to tell the truth, did not expect that the girl would seriously want to sign a contract with him with all the conditions spelled out. He shouldn't have been that surprised since there weren't many reliable users in their field, but the guy was really strong and they shared a secret between the two of them. Monsters leave behind items after their death, and people leave behind only names. If someone cannot become the best on their own, they must promote their name by any known means, using the popularity of other people. After all, being a minor character is worse than death. Therefore, if the main character signs the contract, he will receive a free office, especially for personal use, with such a beautiful girl living next door. She was hinting at herself. After such passionate persuasion, Zhu Yong could not refuse and not enter into an agreement. According to the terms of the graphic contract, the choice of regions will be in the hands of Party A. In addition, the girl will take care of all the amenities in their daily life, as well as all the income and expenses that they will earn in the regions she will manage. If any further assistance was needed, Zhu Yon should contact her at any time of the day or night. The explanations were crystal clear, and the pleasure of the new home was enormous. By and large, the main character now understood that the agreement was truly incredible. Now hunting had become much easier than it had been before. Besides, Heiji is a very beautiful girl who will live next to him, so he should be happy with this opportunity and not refuse it. Plus, she is ready to work as his manager for free. The boy spent quite a lot of time in the dungeon, leveling up the recently copied bloody combat skill. As a result, he achieved his intended goal, and now he no longer needed to re-watch the video with Hai Sung. It would be interesting to combine it with an ice pack and see the result. Moreover, he came up with another interesting combination. To combine Bloody Battle and Fireball in order to test its destructive power, he asked to prepare for a raid in the region. It didn't take long to persuade Heiji. She quickly figured out what was what and got equipped. But her brother wasn't so sure that they were doing the right thing, since they were going to go to the S-rank area with only the three of them. Okay, the girl was too careless, thinking that nothing terrible would happen if they just took one look at how everything was arranged there. But if the brother and sister were about rank 37 to 36, then their new friend was only at rank 15, and it was for him that they should worry the most. However, the main character was not worried about this at all, because he had a plan, and he was going to carry out the entire experience for his comrades. And there they were already in the S-rank area in the Natural Recreation Park. This area was notorious for its mobile plant monsters, since it used to be a recreation park. Now there are many trees that attack people. Therefore, it was necessary to take with you at least 2 domags with a fairly high level, but there were only 3 of them. But today was supposed to be different, and the main character was going to prove it in practice by shooting huge fireballs at his opponents. He knew perfectly well that fire is best suited against trees, which he took advantage of. Certainly with the first success, Zhu Yong relaxed, believing that the heavens were favoring him in today's raid. Last time, he only copied the bloody fight skill to accumulate damage, but just in case, He also copied the auxiliary skill. He still needed to check whether he could copy Bloody Fight from his own camera. Now he combined several of his skills and created a huge fireball that he was going to end this raid with a spectacular monster finishing skill. Moreover, it was now obvious that he could copy a total of 5 skills. Moreover, the young man at that very moment considered himself absolutely invincible. His stats had indeed increased greatly, but his behavior had raised questions among his new friends, and only now had they begun to understand why many had called him a psychopath. But his eccentric behavior came to Ryder's attention. They investigated area after area, and could now confirm with certainty his location, as well as his appearance and skills that matched it. One of the leaders of this organization did not understand the young man, because anyone else in his place would have sat quietly and kept his head down for at least some time, but this one was asking for trouble. And since he wants to die so much, the blonde does not dare to deny him this pleasure. Meanwhile, the main character actively continued to kill wooden monsters and enjoyed the items that fell from them. Moreover, in such a short time he was able to rise 2 levels up. But the most interesting thing is that he managed to obtain a very non-trivial object in the form of a skeleton's hand. It was only after some time that he realized that it was not an object, but a real human skeleton, which led him to the idea that he had relaxed so much and perhaps killed someone by mistake. But Hiji reassured him, saying that a person could not burn to such a pure skeleton, which meant that something else had happened to him. On the other hand, it was quite strange to see that someone dared to enter the region without equipment and weapons. But that was exactly how it was, and on his body were found traces of an attack, beating and robbery. Therefore, this incident will need to be reported to the cleaning department. It is their department. Let them figure out what happened here and how. The main character did not expect such calmness from his girlfriend, but she surprised him again, saying that such cases are not so rare in their profession. A similar situation once happened to a girl. She was attacked by a member of her squad, from whom she did not expect such a thing. This makes it easy to tell which monsters are dangerous and which are not, but with humans, it's a different story. You can't know for sure when they'll want to steal loot from your mortal body. In addition, Hiji was a very attractive girl, so they tried to attack her not only because she had valuable items, but also for completely different reasons. That time, when one of her subordinates attacked her, she killed a person for the first time, and did it without a twinge of conscience. But at the same time, she didn't particularly regret that she had acted in this way, because if she hadn't done it, they would have done something worse to her. Therefore, the main character needs to learn to be more careful and choose his friends wisely, since there are many people in their profession who are not smart enough to be friends. But when it becomes too dangerous, you can hide behind the back of their tank, which will always protect its friends. But Zhu Yeon had no intention of taking advantage of this offer yet. Even though he was only at level 17, he was too confident in his own strength that even if he appeared here again as the boss of the Sky Island, he would not die. But even if he had stood up to the monsters, the cunning of people knows no bounds, so he noticed quite late that someone had thrown a mini-bomb at them. It was a pheromone bomb, meaning its effect would last for about 180 minutes, and the consequences for a person are quite unpleasant: dizziness, paralysis, and others. It looks like these bombs were accompanied by a wave of monsters that were advancing on them in orderly rows. For now, the tank decided to take the main blow, protecting and covering the mages with himself. But the main character had no intention of hiding behind his back, and rushed into battle, believing that he had enough strength to defeat the plant monsters. But he didn't expect that somewhere an ambush had been organized for him, and that crossbowmen were ready to deal him a fatal blow. But he was able to avoid death, since his physical stats are now at the level where some ordinary arrow fired from a crossbow would be of no use to him. The only problem was that it was not an ordinary arrow, but a tricky one. It imposed a stunning, slowing, and pain effect on a person, so the main character fell to his knees, not expecting such a trick. And at that very moment, one of Ryder's leaders appeared in the clearing. No one had seen him yet, so the girl hurried to her friend. Zhu Yong was writhing in pain and couldn't come to his senses. Meanwhile, the first huge wooden monsters had already attacked them. Therefore, Hiji decided to take the initiative in this battle for now. Her fire spear was great at dealing with the wooden monsters, but there were too many of them, and the mana consumption on them was also higher than usual. Even under normal circumstances, they outnumbered their small group, and now they were even more so. So the situation was made even worse by the fact that the main character was injured and could not fight yet. The decision had to be made quickly, otherwise they could all die here. so the girl asked her brother to catch the main character and clear the way for them. Yes, he was struggling to break through the dense flock of tree-like monsters, carrying his precious burden on his shoulder. Meanwhile, the girl walked behind and covered the guys' backs, using a rich arsenal of fire attacks. But the monsters were not their last problem. There were also people who had prepared another nasty trick for them. To somehow protect herself, the girl used Firestorm, but she was not sure that this trick would help. But the bomb was defused. But one of the riders' leaders appeared and was not going to let them go just like that. And he brought a whole group of his people with him in order to certainly destroy the opponents. Basically, the man offered the boy and girl a deal. If they don't give him the psychopath, they can stay alive. If they don't give him, they will die with him, and no one will know about it. But Hiji had no intention of betraying her comrade, so she activated the fire spear in order to deal a preemptive strike to her opponents. But the blonde easily cut through her fiery attack with his sharp blades. At that moment, the girl realized that in front of her was one of the people she had recently met on the raid on the Sky Island, by the characteristic movement of the blade. It was in vain that she said this. It would have been better if she had kept quiet, because now the man intended to kill her as well, since she realized who he was. To do this, the first thing he did was to order one of his subordinates to throw another bomb at them. There was an explosion. The clearing was plunged into thick smoke, and the man rushed to the attack. And after him, a crowd of tree-like monsters ran out of the forest. The situation was not the best, but the small group needed to somehow, at least a little, hold out under such a strong onslaught. Meanwhile, the main character was suffering from his defenselessness. His body did not move at all. All his skin seemed to be burning, and he could not do anything about it, although he understood that his friends were having a very hard time now. He didn't understand how everything could turn out like this. Would he really die so painfully? The situation was extremely absurd and wrong from the start. And this realization, like the first blood he felt on his face, brought him back to his senses a little, made him open his eyes wide. Tank and Hiji were able to defeat the Arava of tree monsters. This was a plus. The minus was that they spent too much energy on it, and the girl was even wounded. But even though the guy came to his senses, he was basically unable to fight now. But he still took out his phone in order to copy at least some skill and turned to his friends with a request. They would have to keep everything they saw a secret, because he was about to reveal a terrible secret to them. Meanwhile, one of the rider leaders smiled brightly, saying that he recognized the players' endurance, so he would grant them a virtually painless death. But there, the girl and her two loyal comrades were not going to give up. They still had some aces up their sleeve. Meanwhile, the man continued to mock the protagonist, not expecting him to have enough willpower to get up, since his body should now be in a terrible state from the pain he was experiencing. The protagonist had no intention of denying the obvious, nor of falling into absurd despair. Moreover, the main character had already cast a new spell, and he looked like a demon from the underworld. But the new fireball would be hundreds of times more powerful than all the ones he had created before. This was the only way to avoid imminent death. He needed to use something like that, and the first thing that came to mind was a meteor shower. The man understood that he had to neutralize the guy by any means necessary because he had lost his mind if he was using this attack. But besides the amazing rain, the main character also used blood rage, so the attacker had absolutely no chance. After another attack, huge dents appeared on the ground, smoking and frightening in their size. Hiju looked at all this magnificence with silent amazement, while the main character could hardly catch his breath. The guy wasn't in the best shape, but he was wondering what his miracle camera had managed to capture, or if it was a dead end. But not seeing anything worthwhile, the guy fell to the ground, feeling an unprecedented relief because they managed to survive. And that's the main thing. In general, he praised himself for his foresight, because if it weren't for the teleporter that was lying around in his storage, then now his cold corpse would be lying here, and not quite alive. But the night before, he had been thinking about what other skill he could copy, considering that he already had 4 of them, and the combinations from them were quite good. And then he came across a guy who was bragging about his amazing teleportation. On the one hand, this skill will not help him personally in battle, but on the other hand, it will be a good backup in case of an unforeseen situation when he just needs to escape from the battlefield. But as soon as the guy read the characteristics of the teleport, he immediately understood that he needed to take it without hesitation or doubt. Having copied it, Ju Yong immediately tested its effect in practice and was pleased with the result. After all, it was his lucky day. But that was yesterday. Today the main character was recovering from the battle, but Hiji was cheerful and wanted to go down and collect all the things that fell from their opponents. Meanwhile, a large number of players had gathered below, emerging from their hiding places, and were now looking with interest at the holes that remained on the ground after the recent battle. Only Ju Yan had no time for holes and objects. He understood perfectly well that he miraculously managed to survive today, but at the same time he revealed his identity, and it was a matter of time before they would try to eliminate him. But what's done is done. And upon returning home, the guy decided to talk to his friends and tell them the whole truth about himself, in order to at least protect himself in this way in the future, which already looked foggy. The young man explained that he had a special skill that allowed him to copy any skill of another player and then apply it in practice. Now it became clear to Hiji why he could use the same techniques as her, and also had access to various buffs. In addition, the girl realized that her friend could also copy her brother's techniques. Although the guy understood that it was possible, it would be extremely difficult for him to use the tank's techniques. It was curious, very curious, and her eyes blazed with genuine interest. Moreover, she wanted to know exactly how many skills the guy had already copied. But the main character wasn't going to tell the girl the details. This was all well and good, but it was time to move on to the main course, namely, to talk about the people who attacked them in the region. There was no arguing with that, and Ju Yan had several thoughts on the matter. For example, it was entirely possible that the guys from the Rain on Sky Island had a hand in this event. This thought was possible, but the girl believed that the attackers could have been connected with Ghoul. We are talking about people who collect items that drop from bosses and pay pretty decent money for it. But in their case, these people wanted to recruit them, even offering them items. But they were refused, which is why the attack happened. But they are not used to receiving rewards, although if you think about it, it is difficult for one group to collect all the items that drop from bosses. So, this organization has taken root all over the world, and no one knows exactly who their leader is. And now Ju Yun must realize what kind of people he crossed and who became his enemy. The friends left and the guy was left alone in the room. He himself understood that he had been careless and had taken part in many high-profile episodes, so it is not surprising that he made enemies. Therefore, he needs to become much stronger by any means necessary if he wants to ultimately survive. He had already collected SP quite well, but the more of them there were, the more difficult it became for him to complete daily quests. Of course, it would be nice if you could do nothing and the tasks would complete themselves, but that doesn't happen. However, he had somehow already reached D rank, knowing that his abilities and skills should have improved by now. But one thought was bothering him. Even though he could copy any skill, it always remained at the same level as the original. But a nice bonus was that some skills that he copied once, he could use an unlimited number of times. In truth, he had always been randomly selecting skills to copy, but now he realized that they could form winning combinations in battle. That's what he thought exactly until the moment when Al called their entire small group for a talk. By and large, this was their first meeting face-to-face, and not through an intermediary. The man clearly wanted to talk about the events on Sky Island and the events that happened after that raid. But his wording was too vague, so Hiji demanded that he clearly state the reason why he came here and met with them. They found each other, both unyielding and daring, but the man only said that he was interested in his friend's opinion about what happened, nothing more. But the dialogue did not go well, so Al took a step forward, confirming the girl's fears that they had recently been attacked by people from Ghoul. In addition, the man had been opposing this global organization for many days, so he was aware of the latest events. Moreover, these people did not collect items just like that. They were trying to find a secret hidden treasure, but they have not found it yet. The girl had thought about something similar more than once, but she didn't understand why Al was telling them secret information. It was all simple. The man couldn't openly ask anyone for help, but such nice friendly get-togethers shouldn't attract much attention, although it would be difficult. On that note, Al decided to end the conversation, but he hoped that next time they could relax and have a nice chat. In another dimension, soldiers lined up in neat rows and waited for their mistress to appear. The girl didn't keep them waiting long and appeared in front of them through the portal, dragging the monster along with her. The commander of her mini-army came out and greeted her. But no matter how politely he behaved, it didn't suit Lin, so she threw the guy against the wall. She said that their master had died, so now she would be in charge, and all questions should be addressed to her. From now on, she will not tolerate any other treatment than that of a boss. Now the guys had to conduct research on the level 20 monster that she had brought to their base. The girl was also pleased that the treasure they were looking for was in South Korea, and most likely no one knew about it, and they had every chance of getting to it first. Unlike many others, the girl understood that true power and wealth were now in the hands of people who possessed not information, but superpowers and items that dropped from bosses. Meanwhile, Juyan went to a ski resort for the first time. The views were beautiful. It was a pity that they couldn't play yet because of the abundance of monsters, but it was not evening yet. Therefore, Hiji hoped that they would quickly finish their mission and be able to return here and have a good rest. But her brother did not share his sister's delight and happiness. He still considered it not a particularly good idea that the three of them had come here. And all because of the events and conversations that happened the day before. Then the girl admitted that she sold some of the items that she had after raiding bosses under her real name. This news hit the guys hard. They didn't expect such a thoughtless act from her, and she didn't care, because from that moment on she could share the same fate with Juyan. And now here they are. The tank grabbed his head again, but hoped that they would do everything normally and correctly. But Hiji thought that her brother shouldn't worry so much because they were very strong with a lot of combat experience. But right at the beginning, something went wrong. A man appeared on their path and blocked their way. The two guys claimed that this area was under the control of the Pleasure Guild, so they had better not try to break through unless they wanted to get hurt or die. It sounded very strange because it was an open area that anyone could use, so no one could control it. But the guys were too brazen and self-confident, and ready to maim and kill those who disagreed with them. This attitude towards people stirred up forgotten feelings in the soul of the main character. On the one hand, he did not consider himself a hero, but he wanted to protect himself and those who were dear to him. Meanwhile, the guys were becoming more and more brazen, making ambiguous hints to Heiji and making offensive, shameful jokes about her. They did it in vain, because the girl had two defenders who, with their strength and magic, could and wanted to break their swords, defending the honor of the beautiful lady. This situation attracted the attention of other players who could not take their eyes off the huge fireball, realizing that they were most likely looking at a psychopath. And he had already come right up to the guys, saying that they had no right to behave like this, and he would now show them what real control and strength were. And the next second, a fireball flew at the guys, throwing them away from the entrance to the region. But they were lucky. They survived. But if they show themselves to the main character again, their comrades will collect them piece by piece. At that moment, Hiji realized that Juyan looked somehow different now, not like usual. But as soon as they entered the region and were left alone, he became his old self again, and the former aura of real masculine strength was no longer there. Moreover, he felt strange, because it was the first time he showed himself from such a side. Perhaps blackmail is his middle name. Meanwhile, the members of the Enjoyment Guild fought the monsters. They were doing well in the fight. But suddenly the main character and his friends arrived and entered into an open confrontation with them. But the guild members were too impudent and considered this region their property. But the man in the white cloak did not take their words seriously and began to slowly approach them, although the guys suggested that he not waste energy and time here and go to another region and hunt. But no one listened to them, and then the two guilds began to sort things out with knives. The man in white didn't really care about losses. He needed to reach the highest point in this region, and everything else didn't matter. After all, they must be the first to find the bracelet and not let it fall into the wrong hands. Meanwhile, the main character and his friends understood that they had only taken the first step towards their goal. Now they needed to think about the next steps. Tank reminded that the Rider Guild was numerous, and primitive solutions against them were meaningless. If so, then you first need to think about the goals that your opponents are pursuing and start from there. For example, the riders are hunting for treasures, which means that they are not interested in monsters at all. And this had to be taken advantage of, and after some time the first group of monsters attacked the riders. And the main character had a hand in this. He provoked a directed wave of monsters and watched the result from a safe place. Of course, it was difficult to understand who was who, but Zhu Yang believed that it was much simpler than it seemed. Everything would depend on the reaction of people to the monsters. After all, if people came here not for the purpose of hunting but for treasure, then they will not get involved in an active fight, and that is what happened. Most of their group left, and a few players remained in the clearing with monsters. Now it was necessary to follow them to get to the right place. But the guy couldn't just leave, and he threw down a small bombshell gift. And Hija once again realized that he had changed, and qualities had awakened in him that she hadn't noticed before. Meanwhile, the riders followed the landmarks on the map, and after some time they reached a cave in the rock. Zhu Yan was also glad that his intuition had not failed him, but it was strange that he was completely calm in a situation where he was hunting people who were trying to kill him. He was so deep in thought that he scared the girl a little, but he quickly pulled himself together, took out his crossbow and took aim. And he fired, hitting right into the hand of the girl who was holding the sword and did not expect such a trick. But since the arrow was poisoned, she died, and the man was quicker and was able to dodge the arrow and was now ready to fight back. But this didn't frighten Zhu Yong, as he had tried out one of his debuffs on the enemy, and now the man was extremely helpless. After all, his health level has practically dropped to 0. Meanwhile, the second group of riders had already found the treasure and taken it. But after contacting the first group, they did not receive an answer about the situation. This made it clear to them that their comrades were under attack and they had to be prepared for anything. They had a mission to protect the treasure at any cost, so they were prepared for both a fight and the prospect of seeing their dead friends on the way out. But even knowing what to expect, it was difficult to withstand Heeja's firestorm. But it is no more difficult than for her brother to withstand an attack of lightning and thunder from an enemy. Moreover, the guy was neutralized. Now the rankers were preparing to take out Zhu Yon and Heiju. It was their mistake. You can't assume that if a tank can't fight, then the rest are easy targets, and the guy was ready to clearly prove it. By activating the limit break, the protagonist gained enormous power that was frightening. But the writers thought that Fireball wouldn't work properly here, and they almost got turned into a roast. The guy was ready to correct this mistake and take the treasure for himself. He would find a better use for it. Meanwhile, the third group of riders had finished with the monster war and wanted to contact the other groups. But this was not necessary since the explosion was impossible not to notice, so they noticed it and ran in that direction. Meanwhile, the main character and his friend searched these guys and took all the valuable items for themselves. But unlike the others, the girl chose only one subject for herself since she did not want to complicate her escape routes too much. But her brother chose a thing that he didn't want to sell on the black market. Moreover, he wanted to use it for its intended purpose. And it was the right decision, as was handing over the bracelet, the main treasure, to the main character, because he already had an SS rank item that he actively used. The guy was very grateful, but it was time for them to leave, because soon the second group would be here, and the fight with them would not be so easy. Meanwhile, one of the riders came to report to Lin, and she did not like what she heard, because there was nothing good in the report. The man fell to his knees in fear before the girl, realizing that she could kill him for the bad news, so he began to ask for forgiveness for the failure of the operation. Lin didn't expect that someone would be able to fool a strike force of their best players while they would suffer losses, and someone would steal their bracelet. But no one could have foreseen that the strike force would have to split up due to a wave of monsters, and one of the subgroups would be ambushed and destroyed. Only after analyzing all the data was it discovered that someone had used bombs that had triggered a wave of monsters. Yes, that was no excuse, but that was how it happened. Lin understood that they had lost not only the bracelet, but also other items that had fallen from the monsters and were on the dead. Moreover, behind all this stood a psychopath whom they had recently tried to eliminate. And if so, then the man and his people had to analyze his actions once again and make sure that there would be no more such mistakes. Otherwise, it would be bad for them. In addition, they must return the bracelet by any means necessary and also bring her the psychopath's head on a saucer. Meanwhile, the guys got together and started discussing what to do with the items they received. Heiji suggested not to sell them for now, but to hold on to them. This had to be done in order to make it difficult to figure out their identities. Besides, the girl has already revealed her name to divert suspicion from the guy. However, 2 active actions can bring them big trouble. But this does not mean that she has given up and will no longer hunt. Now they needed to discuss another issue. The guy had to remember and give the girl a clear answer about how many F-rank bosses he had been able to kill over the course of his entire life. Overall, he killed a lot of different bosses, but only one F-rank one. And that was a problem, so they needed to hurry and collect more F-rank boss souls. But before that, they need to collect more souls of E-rank bosses, because the riders only target unpopular areas and bosses, and they need to make their lives miserable. This is what they began to actively do after some time. Having killed another boss, the main character felt great. He wasn't even tired, to be honest. He even beat his last record and spent only 5 minutes and 45 seconds to kill this boss. This was great news because the guy had achieved his goal and collected the required number of E-rank boss souls. Now he could celebrate this event. But this was not as important to Zhu Yong as the fact that the bracelet constantly raised his stats. He even thought that if he continued to develop at this pace, he would become stronger than Al. Meanwhile, a fairy assistant was watching his actions and development. She also came up with a new task for him to complete, which caused the main character to become thoughtful. He was curious about where the special E-rank area would appear in order to complete the task. He would have to spend 3 hours on the plane to get there, and the weather there promised to be disgusting, so the main character calmed down his ardor. He also informed the others that they needed to go to an unknown location and clear out a special E-rank area. But it sounded too crazy, because the base of those regions was worse than anything they had encountered before. It is necessary to understand that even if they go there, it is not enough for them to have the ability to fight. They need to be able to fly aircraft, especially when it comes to the overseas region, which is very strictly guarded and no one is allowed inside without an invitation. Therefore, they would need a person who could obtain such a permit invitation for them, but they decided to think about this a little later. In any case, it was a great opportunity for Ju Yong to move up to the second step. And if up until this time he had been using the skills of ordinary players, then Heiji suggested that he learn as many SS rank or S rank skills as possible, but it was not that easy since high-ranking players carefully guarded their skills, and it was impossible to spy on them on social networks. The girl herself understood this perfectly well, but there was an option to buy a high-ranking skill, although she had never met an SS rank player who would do something like that. At that moment he remembered Hyo-ju, whom he met during one of his raids. Since they didn't have any better options yet, he decided to call the girl, since she herself offered him her companionship. Meanwhile, the fairy assistant was happy that the main character had decided to begin completing the second important quest. She could not help but be pleased that his memory was gradually beginning to return, and this world was getting closer to survival. But the fairy still wanted to meet someone who was a hero, like he was many years ago when he saved her world from destruction. But the problem was that it was his memories that made a person one way or another. But now Ju Yan didn't remember anything from that time, so it was hard to call him the hero that the fairy remembered. The same thing happened with the fragment of God's soul that spoke to the fairy. But for the fairy, even in this form she was a goddess, and therefore the hero was a hero. But even if so, the hero could make a choice, as he did many years ago. And if he doesn't, he will have to be forced to. And this was the fairy's mistake, because every living creature had to make a choice independently, both a person and a fairy, and only she could decide whether to help him now or not. And the fairy decided to help, so she transformed into Hyo-ju and answered the call. The conversation was short, and the guy and the girl agreed to meet in the park. But the brother and sister volunteered to accompany the guy to the meeting, and the girl was indignant and questioned all the words and actions of the stranger. And while they were discussing the girl, she appeared next to them, as if at the snap of her fingers, and grabbed the main character's hand. Hyo-ju was a little offended that the guy had taken so long to meet them, but the embarrassed blush on his cheeks made up for it. Since the couple didn't pay attention to the others, Heiji intervened in the conversation, saying that she had heard about the girl from the main character. But the girl's acquaintance turned out to be tense. Even Ju Yan got a little bit of it. However, they got straight to the point they had gathered here for. But it was about the price, so the guy had to consult with Heiju about it. But the guy decided to do and explain everything to himself, and his words affected the girl, so she showed him one of her buffs. It was a melody of heaven that increased all stats by about 20%. This skill was from her past life that could protect her body, and it was the main character who taught her, so he now felt a kinship with this skill, believing that he could not find anything better than it, and copied it. Now the protagonist was ready, and went to a special E-rank area where the temperature never rose above -30, and the overall weather conditions were too harsh. So many players stayed there forever. In any case, before the trip they had to come up with a plan of action, which did not work out very well. The main character had only one idea: to wait for the boss to appear. Only no one could say when this would happen. But such an absurd approach to the situation did not please the tank, and he refused to go to the region until there was a clear plan, and they did not carry out the same thorough preparation for it, because they all have only one life, and it must be protected. The brother's words angered the girl. She believed that a player cannot be a person who only thinks about his own safety. Meanwhile, the main character tried to level up his bloody combat skill, but something went wrong this time. But the guy continued his monotonous work until a breakthrough occurred, and he got the desired result. And this was good news, but since they were foreigners, they could not get into the overseas region just like that. And at that moment, Heiji received a call from someone, and she started talking to that person too sweetly, which made the guys wary. It turned out that it was a call from the Korean Players Guild, and they had a message for the protagonist. Namely, the overseas region was opened for them. They will be able to take part in the raid there. There was just one problem here. Only mages could go on a raid, but the main character registered in the guild as a healer. But there was no time to think about it, because they definitely wouldn't have another chance. And all the participants of the raid this time gathered in a huge concert hall, since most of them belonged to the elite. At this moment, a handsome young man named Hae Sung appeared on the scene, and he would lead the raid and expedition. This whole event will last for 10 days. After this period, they will all return home. Everyone who was in the hall, the man personally selected after the raid on the Sky Island. So he was confident in their strength and skills, and believed that they would not disgrace the country and him personally. But before sharing information about the raid, he was going to give a short briefing, and while doing so, his gaze caught the main character. And from his gaze, a herd of unpleasant goosebumps ran down the guy's back. But the man didn't continue to stare at him, and explained that he was at level 39 and had an SS rank ability, Critical Strike. After that, everyone started introducing themselves as if they had just met for the first time at school, and the leader again fixed his gaze on the main character, burning him right through. This was something that Ju Yan didn't like at all. He didn't understand where such hostility was coming from, so he hoped that at least a devoted fan would attract the instructor's attention. But the miracle did not happen, and the expectant gaze of the instructor was supplemented by other gazes, and since everything turned out this way, he decided to put on a show, called his signature ball, and called himself not by his real name, but by a nickname. At this point, the acquaintance ended, the players began to disperse, and it was time to go and eat. However, they were unable to do this, as Hae Sung approached them and directly asked Ju Yan if he was the one who stole the item of the boss who was killed on Sky Island. The main character did not deny it and admitted that he was on the Sky Island. Yes, he took part in the battle and made the biggest contribution to it. But he did not work with the guys in masks, and even more so, he did not steal anything. In general, he was there doing his own thing and accidentally met those guys. He couldn't stop their raid alone, so he kept an eye on them. But when the commotion started, he lifted the mask of one of the dead, and then they took him for one of their own. So he had to go with them since he saw what they did to those who were against them. But his target was the boss, whom he killed. But if they wanted to work together, then they needed to clarify all the points. If that didn't work, he would find another way to go to the E-rank area. The guy's speech slightly reduced the level of hostility, but the man still hadn't calmed down, and asked the guy about what kind of relationship he had with the two guys from his guild who died then. But the guy had nothing to do with their death, so the man, although he didn't trust him, wasn't against his participation in the raid. At this point, the first stage of implementation could be considered complete, and it was possible to rest a little. True, the guy looked very tired, as he understood that he would have to hide his identity all the time. He thought that when the players found out that he was a psychopath, there would be a violent reaction, but everyone was calm. Meanwhile, Lin's people came to report to her. This time she was pleased with them. They had collected excellent information on the protagonist's friends, so Lin decided to introduce several of her people into the new raid where they would be. She was also interested in the blonde, and her fate was no better than that of the main character. And now they have arrived at their destination. The main character is wrapped in warm clothes like never before. They spent a certain number of hours in the air, then an unknown amount of time on a bus, and now Ju Yan realized how much he didn't like it here because of the cold. He even had the idea to melt everything here with a fireball, but a man came up to them and told them that it had never been so cold here before. It all happened when the special area appeared. Then climate anomalies occurred. People could no longer live here, and every year more and more cities became empty, so players were the last hope of ordinary people. At that moment, a blonde woman approached them, looking like a real angel. She was sure that they were all here for a reason and were coping with the task at hand with God's help. The guy immediately recognized her as a minister of Julie's cult, because all of its members had skills with elements of divinity. Initially, they were an ordinary sect that gathered followers and cheated them out of money. But then something changed, and the girl in front of him didn't look like a fraud. Saint Suka possessed enormous power that went beyond the S rank and gathered around her equally strong guys. But in the cult itself, they had an interesting relationship. This was evident from the somewhat arrogant speeches of one of the men. He believed that before they began clearing the region, they needed to rest, even if their leader hadn't said so. The rest of the players remained standing in their places, looking after the saints, not understanding what had just happened. And Hiji thought that they were offended by the main character, but a guy came up to them and supported Ju Yan, because everyone knew the history of the creation of this cult. But something else was interesting. Why they came to this place, and what goal they were pursuing. It was sad to realize that this guy turned out to be the enemy of the main character, since he represented the interests of the writers, despite the fact that he looked and behaved friendly. Moreover, he assured everyone that he wanted to avoid unnecessary conflicts, even up to the boss fight. And on the one hand, this was good, but the glances they cast at the main character eloquently said that this raid would not go smoothly for him. The guy understood perfectly well that the writers would not leave him alone, but now they even looked normal, which was understandable after all in a public place. But they couldn't let their guard down. Meanwhile, Hae-sung gave a new briefing. He divided all his people into 3 groups. They had to explore the entire region and kill the boss. The final preparations were completed, which meant it was possible to enter the region itself. And if they all thought that they were cold, then when they entered the region they realized that they were still warm, and in front of them they saw strange people, or maybe skeletons. And what was the surprise of the people when they realized that the skeletons were alive? The first clash began. The arrows of the people hit their target right on target. Only this didn't help much, and their bodies were like paper, easy to damage, but their attacking power was beyond fantasy. Even strong tanks found it extremely difficult to contain their onslaught. Nevertheless, the people managed to repel the first attack, and now they were resting by the fire, thinking that it wasn't so bad on the Sky Island. The only one who behaved strangely was the main character, so he was again the center of attention. He was pleased because he had figured out how to defeat all the skeletons together. However, the tank asked him to be careful so that it doesn't turn out like last time. At this point, the leader of the group took the floor and reminded that there were several safe zones in the region, and that all monsters, like people, moved in large and small groups. But they don't need to gain points and experience. Their main task is to kill the boss, so he was ready to send a small group of players to look for him. 2 whole days passed at this pace, and finally a moment of respite came outside the region. The girl didn't let the guys rest and said that they would first discuss the situation and skills and then everything else. Hiji thought for a long time and came to the conclusion that players prefer to gradually increase their level, and even go to areas an order of magnitude higher to gain experience. But at the same time, not only the level of the players rises, but also the areas, so the abilities of the monsters become more pronounced. Therefore, for many players who have a special individual skill, trips to such areas can be perceived as an interesting adventure, and they can develop into excellent hunters. Now it was necessary to understand that fire skills would help in the fight against skeletons, but they would not help with their boss. Since that was the case, Ju-yeon was going to think about it and apply one fantastic formula to his skills, and if everything worked out as he expected, then it would be a grand result. But first he showed his friends one of the skills he had recently found, and it was about the heavenly court. His friends approved of him, and when they went to the region again, the protagonist tried out a new combination of skills on the monsters. It worked flawlessly on ghouls and skeletons. To tell the truth, neither the tank nor the sorceress expected such a lethal effect. And the question arose, what was the level of mana the guy had that he could do something like this? But he only smiled and was not going to reveal this secret. Meanwhile, the tank was monitoring the situation around him. He understood that they had been searching for the boss for more than 2 hours and had gone quite far, and if they continued further, it would be problematic to return home. And there were no monsters in sight nearby, so I could go back with peace of mind. But the main character noticed people from the cult below and watched them. It would be good if one of them had the skill to copy. But on the other hand, he still liked fire and ice skills more. Suddenly, he noticed that another group had appeared below, and who would have doubted that they were the riders? It had to be admitted that they fought quite well. No matter how the monsters attacked them, the men managed to hold the line, and the advantage was on their side. And most likely, no matter how hard it is for them in battle, they will definitely win this fight. Below, a terrible picture opened up. The corpses of people and monsters were mixed together. Hiji thought that there was nothing more to see, and that they should leave here, but the protagonist was in no hurry to follow her advice. He felt that something strange was happening, and he was not mistaken. The killed people turned into walking skeletons and attacked their comrades. With this report they returned to the camp. Hae-sung did not believe what he heard. And how could one believe that killed people and monsters came back to life after some time? Thus, to prevent the creatures from coming back to life, they must be burned or deprived of all limbs. The bad news didn't end there. 2 more scout teams had not been heard from for a long time and were impossible to track down. 3 more days passed at this pace, and there was still no news from the scout teams. And at that moment, one of the subordinates ran to the leader. He was sure that they had discovered something very interesting. The monster in the video looked unusual. Outwardly, it looked like a bull, but there was something elusively frightening about it. It was quite possible that this was the boss they had been looking for so long. And if that was the case, then it was necessary to move forward and kill this monster. To achieve their goal, Ju Yan and Hae Sung worked together. The boy prepared the monsters for destruction, and the man dealt them fatal blows. They came to this agreement 5 hours ago when they began preparing for the operation, because the boss had been found. Considering that he was wearing armor, it could be concluded that he was very strong and it would be very difficult to defeat him. Hiji suggested focusing all firepower on the boss, but her brother was against this plan as they didn't have enough tanks to hold back the influx of skeletons. The dilemma was difficult, and the leader had to decide whether to start acting quickly or think a little more, because other guilds could attack the boss first. But they should not forget that because of haste, they themselves could die and become monsters. And then the man decided that in 5 hours they would arrive at the right place and he would take on the boss. And so they make their way to the monster. Hae Sung acted clearly. He was used to working alone. But now everything was not as usual. The path was being paved with his fire by a guy he didn't trust. But the main character covered his back very well, which was strange. It was strange, but at the same time very pleasant. He didn't even expect that he would start to like it. And how the main character liked being the joker of this battle, which almost no one knows about. Yes, and the leader of their raid held up well, although he left a few unkilled monsters, which the guy reminded him of and asked him to fix. The man also changed his attitude towards the guy during the fight, and began to look at him strangely and warmly, even made a compliment. And soon, they broke through the first line of defense of the monsters and went deep into the cave. But no matter how hard they tried, time was not on their side, so they had to act quickly, according to plan. And they tried, but time ran out, and they had to prepare for an enemy attack. The boss emerged from his hiding place. He was fierce and ready to destroy everything in his path. At this point, it became clear that they had underestimated the enemy. His size was frightening, and the commander had to run away from him to the main group. The players needed to get to the safe zone as quickly as possible, but it was extremely difficult to do so. To buy his men some time, the man took the boss's full blow on himself. Oddly enough, he managed to injure the monster's leg. But that didn't mean the humans had won, and they knew it when the boss growled. His roar was not simple and had a negative effect on human eardrums, which were about to burst. But they didn't burst, and the boss stopped growling as quickly as he started. And that was a plus. The minus was that he called his army of undead to help. There were too many of them, and the players were in a closed space. The chances of winning were creeping towards 0. Everyone understood, including the main character, that they urgently needed a new plan.